Buenos días a todos y a todas. Mi nombre es Cristina Gómez, soy punto nacional de contacto y representante dentro de la Fundación Española para la Ciencia y la Tecnología, FECIT. Os quería dar las gracias a todas las personas que estáis detrás de la pantalla y también a todos los compañeros y compañeras que están hoy conmigo aquí en esta sesión de COFUND Convocatoria 2021. I will switch to English now, as the first part of this session will be done in English, will be delivered in English. And first of all, I have to apologize. Our director, Borja Izquierdo, will not be able to join us today for this introduction. So I think we're going to skip the welcome words. I'm just going to start by thanking everybody today to have joined us online. And basically, I would like to thank Alan Gregg, our representative from the Research Executive Agency, and also the two speakers that are Maria Esarela and Nuria Mateo. All the three of them today will explain a little bit more about this new COFUND call from REA perspective, from the policy perspective, and also from the experience of the projects that have succeeded in obtaining a grant in Horizon 2020. So I'm just slowly going to start. I can see the numbers that are rising there. Around 62 people have joined us today. And with no further delay, I'm just going to start my presentation. So I would like to ask you just to check. Yeah, I think you can see my screen properly. I guess this is the case. If I have no other messages, I think yes, so everything is fine. Okay, so this is the agenda for today's meeting. We are going to start by talking about the call itself, the main objectives, the rules of participation, evaluation criteria, and many things that Alan Gregg is going to tell us about. And we have left around 15 minutes or 20 minutes for your questions, because we are aware that this is the new framework program, that there are changes compared to the previous Horizon 2020, and you might have new questions that you need to have an answer to. Then we're going to listen to both Maria and Nuria, the success stories. This part is going to be carried out in Spanish. They are going to explain us in their situation how they managed to obtain the funding. In the case of Maria, it's actually a small project, a small COFUND. And in the case of Nuria, she's going to explain the situation of Campus Iberos that has actually two COFUND projects that have been funded. For your information, this event is going to be recorded. It is recording right now, and everything is going to be posted in our website in Horizonte Europa, the video together with the presentations. And what we're going to do also, just in case there are still some doubts, and in order for us to give you more information on budgets, on examples, on more practical aspects, we will have an informal session. We did something similar during summer called Café con tu NCP, dedicated to management personnel from the institution, from EU to EU project managers. So the idea is that if there are any doubts left after these sessions, we will be able to answer them. Just the national contact points will be there for you. And we're going to do that next 15th of December. So save the date in your agendas if possible. And we will be shortly sending a link to all of you. We're going to post that on Twitter and in our website. So as this tool, GoToWebinar, is not very easy to respond to the questions from the audience in the tool itself, what we have done is have a Mentimeter for you so that you can send us all your questions and your comments from today's presentations, okay? I'm going to ask my colleague to include in the chat the link, the exact link to this Mentimeter, that you can see the code there. You can also have the QR for you to copy if you wish to do so. But I can see now that Xavi has included the code and the Menti, so that's perfect. Thank you, Xavi. So I think Jesus hasn't been able to join us yet, but he will very shortly. I think by now you all know the four of us, Xavier Couch, my colleague at CECIT, Maria Herrero at the Agencia Estatal CSIC, Jesús Rojo, who has been NCP together with me in Horizon 2020 from Fundación Madrid+D, and myself at Fundación Española para la Ciencia y la Tecnología, are your support team and your contact persons in Spain for MSCA in general. So what we ask you is to please send your emails to msca@csit.es. This is the email, the inbox that we have for already a couple of years right now, and that we see it works perfectly well to try to get back to you as soon as possible. So this is one of the many promotional activities that we carry out at CECIT to support institutions and researchers to participate in this Horizon Europe framework program. That, as you know, will last from 2021 to 2027 and has a funding of 95 billion euros for this period. I'm not going to take too much time because you are all very well that this program has been defined not as a revolution but as an evolution, and it is structured in 3 different pillars. MSCA is still part of Pillar 1 as it was in Horizon 2020, the pillar that aims at promoting scientific excellence, mobility and the attraction of the best researchers to Europe in order to consolidate and strengthen the European research area. Having all this in mind, MSCA is the European Union program that supports researchers at all stages of their research careers, and it aims at improving their skills, their training, and their research career development. MSCA will do so by financing the training and the recruitment of researchers in international, intersectorial, and interdisciplinary projects. This triple I dimension is a cornerstone to MSCA. International, because you might all be aware that researchers have to move to carry out their research projects. Intersectorial, because researchers will be able to spend time at the non-academic sector as it is defined, and will acquire transversal skills that will make them more employable throughout their research career in their many different research career paths. So the contribution of industry, of SMEs, is essential in the project. This intersectorality is also needed in the COFUND call that we will see today. Interdisciplinary, because we all know by now that it is essential that different actors from different disciplines come together to try to solve the current challenges. It's open to all domains of scientific domains, but the program at the same time, when it has this bottom-up approach, it still embraces the most important European policies, such as the Green Deal, or also the need to establish a closer relation and to bridge the European research area and the higher education area. It is a program that enhances the attractive and the good conditions, working conditions and employment conditions for researchers, and that is something that we will talk about a lot today. MSCA looks for impact at different levels. We've also already mentioned the level of the researchers. He or she will be able to get new skills, transversal skills, and improve his or her scientific domain. It will also look for impact at institutional level, and that's very important for today's call, because it will allow the institution to somehow internationalize the institution and also increase their scientific excellence. And of course, excellence in the scientific field as such and in the system. Enable the recruitment of the top researchers. So I'm not going to go into details because here we're going to focus today in COFUND, this specific call. But you may notice that there's no much difference between Horizon 2020 calls and Horizon Europe call. Basically, the terminology, and I think the program has included stream-like actions with a clearer identity. So we have simpler rules now in a way that to better enable participants to have a clearer version of what the program is about, and also in order to somehow confront this high demand that was already in Horizon 2020 while maintaining the high quality of the program. There are a couple of new guidelines that are strategic, and I think it's important for you to be aware of, the guidelines on supervision and also the MSCA Green Charter. So what is COFUND about? COFUND is a new mechanism, and the word says it all. It's co-funding. So part of the funds will come from the EU and part of the funds will come from the institution that applies for it. It's the call that will allow institutions to fund research and innovation. So I've already told you that MSCA is an absolute bottom-up approach program, and the same will apply to COFUND. Depending on many factors, all research fields will be funded, or only specific areas, included regional and national smart specialization strategy, can be covered. COFUND will therefore allow the recruitment and the training of researchers at different stages of their careers that will have to comply with the mobility rule and from any nationality. It will encourage, as MSCA does, the execution of programs with an international, intersectorial and interdisciplinary research dimension. I think that COFUND is with no doubt, I think from my perspective, the MSCA action that has a stronger institutional impact. And it will allow the institution not only to increase the internationalization strategy and the scientific excellence and knowledge, but also to align your institutional strategy on human resources with what the European Commission or the EU policies is looking for. And of course, this impact will have an impact and will be spread at regional, national, and international level. And what I'm trying to say with this short couple of slides here that I'm going to show you now is the importance that this program has had in Spain during the last few years. You can see that in Horizon 2020, 44 projects have been funded, out of which right now I think 38 are still active and running. You can see obviously, and the map says it all, there are many more projects in Madrid or in Barcelona. But that's also the reason why I chose today, when we were decided the agenda, we chose 2 projects that are not in Madrid or in Barcelona, just for you to see that there are several regions in Spain that are that have funding coming from COFUNDs. To me, it's not that much the number of projects or the number of millions that have been received by these calls, but mainly the number of researchers. More than 1,350 researchers are now in the system, be it doctoral candidates. There are 18 doctoral programs and 26 fellowship programs. So I think this is really what is nurturing the system at different levels. And just for you to have an idea on the type of institutions that, at least in Spain, are asking and getting the funds, you can see obviously that universities and research centers are the ones that are receiving the funding, are applying and receiving the funding. But you can also see institutions coming from the private sector, and funding institutions that have received the fund. So where can you find all this information? The Funding and Tenders Opportunities portal, of course, that's where you will have to download all the information. And this presentation, the video and everything is going to be uploaded in the National Horizon Europe website. So for me to finish with, because I don't want to take more time, so we are on time, I will tell you a little bit more about the support that we're going to provide to all the applicants that are listening to us today, okay, as NCPs. We have already started the bilateral meetings. We've already had a couple of them actually. So if your institution is willing to prepare a project for this next call, please do not hesitate to send us an email, and we will be settling bilateral meetings with you to somehow guide you through the process. We will do a pre-screening services, and we will open it at the beginning of January, just after Los Tres Reyes Magos. Back from holidays, and we will close it on the 17th of January. Okay, so and then the time for us to get back to you with our comments will be at most 2 weeks after having accepted your proposals to be pre-screened. Okay, we will try this time to have 1 or 2 NCPs looking at the same proposals, so we will try to peer review them. And as we have been doing for the last few years, what we ask you is that it is the European Projects Office or the European Liaison Office, depending on the name of your institution, that sends us the proposal to be pre-screened. We will have an online form for you to fill in. We will open up and publish it on Twitter and on website, so don't worry, when the time comes, it will be available. And we will just do one pre-screening of the project. We always say it's not a scientific pre-screening, but we'll try to give you support in the structure as such. Of course, we talk here about coordination, and Alan will tell you that this is a mono beneficiary action, but what we mean is that we will only pre-screen proposals that are done by Spanish institution as the main mono beneficiary institution. And we will set us some specific criteria in case that we get too many proposals to pre-screen. That's all from my side. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to give the floor to Alan, and for that I have to let him be a panelist. So Alan, you should have received an email by now. Emails are not a message. That it is, and then the floor is yours.
So Christina, just sorry, can you just confirm you can see this, because as you know,
yes,
it looks different. It's fine.
I can confirm that everything we can see everything on screen. Thank you.
Okay. Well, thank you very much, Christina, for that very useful introduction, and also thank you for the invitation to do this once again. I am very disappointed for the second year in a row, in fact, that this isn't happening in Spain, but it's only happening virtually. But it does have the advantage, I guess, that it allows more attendees to actually come and see these presentations. Also, thank you to all of you. I mean, I usually at this point say thank you for coming today. Thank you for walking from your bedrooms to your kitchens or whatever it was you had to do in order to open up your computer. I think it's our experience that the people who take the time to attend these events and also to ask questions following up these events are the people who are ultimately successful in their proposals. So I hope this will be time that you will be investing very wisely today. Unfortunately, I mean, I don't mind if you have urgent questions, if you can ask Christina to interrupt me and ask them. I usually like to be interrupted when I'm talking physically, but I know this is much more difficult when we're doing it virtually. But of course, we'll be taking questions at the end. So really just to echo something which Christina said very clearly in her introduction. We're using this phrase that this is evolution, not revolution, between Horizon 2020 and Horizon Europe. And the changes in COFUND are relatively small, and I will try to highlight them as we go along. But essentially, we're talking about almost identical program to the one which many of you listening to this will be aware of from Horizon Europe. Or indeed from FP7, it still has a lot of similarities with FP7 postdoctoral COFUND program. But so apologies to those of you who are very heavily involved in this. You'll be hearing some things again, but a lot of the things I'm going to be saying, even if you're hearing them for the 5th or 6th time, I think actually bear repeating in order to help you to put in good proposals. So let's see if this works. So summary page. Christina said very clearly the clue is in the name of the action. It's COFUND. So we co-fund new or existing national, regional, international, in fact, as well as schemes for doctoral training and postdoctoral fellowships, and we'll be talking about the details of that in the next half an hour or 45 minutes or so. There's going to be a little bit of politics in these first few slides, but actually maybe unlike the other Marie Curie actions, the politics are maybe a little bit more important when you're putting in a co-fund application, because we don't just see this as Christina said, in fact, we don't just see this as a way of spreading research funding around Europe and helping researchers, but we also see co-fund as a very strong mechanism to spread best practice around Europe, and that's what we say here in this first bullet point. So we want to be able to see proposers introducing new and better practices to the ones they're doing now, and also to be doing their best to spread them at least throughout their institution, but probably also throughout Spain and potentially throughout the rest of Europe. And like all of the Marie Curie actions, we lay great emphasis on the working conditions of the fellow. And I mean, I can just pause here maybe to say what may actually be possibly the most important thing that I will say in this presentation, which is that if you're going to rush from these presentations and start writing an application this afternoon, the most important thing to always have in the back of your mind are the working conditions and the research options that are available for the fellows. Co-fund, like all Marie Curie actions, but in particular co-fund, it's not about research, it's about researchers. And therefore, any proposal you should be putting forward should be about producing excellent, in fact, working conditions for the researchers and giving them excellent opportunities, hopefully beyond opportunities which are beyond what would normally be available to them through, for example, other national schemes. We also like to see that these structuring effects that you will introduce will be sustainable, so that we don't just give you some of the money and you start to do new things, but then you stop doing them as soon as we stop contributing to the program. And one other thing about co-fund, although this is actually quite difficult, and I think maybe Christina can give you some guidance on this, but we've seen difficulty with this third bullet point in the past, but we encourage also synergies with other European Union funding, for example, cohesion policy funds and recovery and resilience facility. We understand this is a difficult thing for you to do, but we encourage you to do it if it's appropriate for your program. And I will talk a lot in the next half hour or 40 minutes about the bottom-up nature of the program. Co-fund, like any Marie Curie action, we encourage you to produce as wide and open a program as possible. But of course, we recognize that you are not the European Union. You do not have the facilities to run a program like, for example, our individual fellowships program, where we say we will fund any area of research. So we understand there will be restrictions on the sorts of programs you can offer. We would not, for example, expect a medical facility to be able to offer programs in Spanish literature. But having said that, we would like within the restrictions that you have, either geographic restrictions or scientific restrictions, or even sources of funding restrictions, we insist that you try to have as open and as wide a program as possible. So to take the example I was kind of building up just there again, if it's a hospital who's the main actor here, then not just focused in one division of the hospital, for example, unless there was a very good reason for doing that, which you would have to therefore justify in the proposal. But we do also say in the work program that you can focus, again, as Christina mentioned, on disciplines based on the smart specialization strategies. But to jump just back up to the very first phrase on this slide, importantly for you, co-fund is a mono-beneficiary action. Now, that doesn't mean that typically we expect only the beneficiary, only one institution to be involved in the research training. We in fact expect the beneficiary to set up networks with other research institutions inside and outside of Spain, if possible, in order to provide the research training offer for the doctoral fellows and the postdoctoral fellows. But legally, we are a mono-beneficiary action. So if we, for example, sign a contract with an institution in Barcelona, even if that institution in Barcelona is sending people to many other places, for example, the Melbourne, there's a Melbourne University Institute in Barcelona, which is sending people to Australia for part of it. But even if that institute is sending people to other places, then that institute, the mono-beneficiary, is responsible legally for the execution of the action. So that has two effects, one which is good, one which is bad. The good effect is it makes it easy for you to deal with us, because the reporting and such like is all very straightforward, with us talking to one institution and vice versa. The thing that makes it difficult for you as the beneficiary is you then become responsible for the execution of the action and therefore responsible for the behaviour of your partner institutions. So again, having emphasised that, and I may come back to this again later, we don't insist that before you put in a proposal you have a partnership agreement, but we very strongly recommend that before you put in a proposal, or as you're putting in the proposal, you develop a partnership agreement before anything is actually funded. We are all, many of us, maybe not all of us, but many of us are optimists by nature, and we start these things off by thinking, no, we will all get on well, there will be no problems, we're all pushing in the same direction, and of course problems do occur. And it's wise to have a mechanism for dealing with these before they occur and not to deal with them after they have occurred. So I'm just going to get a little bit further into, I guess, with each slide. I mentioned the previous slide, there are two modalities, doctoral programs and postdoctoral programs. Just before I talk about those, let me also make clear that you can't apply for a mixed program. You can't put in a program saying we want to recruit 10 doctoral researchers and 15 postdoctoral researchers. That would require you to put in two separate applications. But there is no limit on the number of applications you may submit to the program. You could submit as one institution several applications for postdoctoral programs and several for doctoral programs. There is a limit, which I'll come to later, on what you can be awarded, but for application there is no restriction. So doctoral programs, we say the same sorts of things for the doctoral candidates as we do, for example, our doctoral networks. We expect in COFUND that in fact we insist in COFUND that all of the doctoral researchers are enrolled into a doctoral program in at least one EU member state or Horizon Europe associated country. Doesn't necessarily have to be the doctoral program which is in your institution. It could be a doctoral program somewhere else, as long as the people who are taking up the fellowships have the opportunity, are enrolled in the doctoral program and have an open path towards achieving their doctoral degree. So that's how the doctoral programs work, briefly. We also ask for you to support these fellows for at least the typical length of time that it takes to obtain a doctoral degree in the country where they're actually doing the research, be it Spain or any other country. That is also maybe slightly different from some, I'm not quite sure how it works in Spain, but it's maybe slightly different from some national situations where the typical length for a doctoral degree is maybe 3.5 years, but they only get 3 years funding. We don't insist on this, but we kind of expect you to say if it's going to take 3.5 years typically to get a PhD, then they should be supported for those 3.5 years. This is all part of giving good working conditions to the doctoral researchers. And the postdoctoral program, individual advanced research training, career development fellowships, very similar to the idea that we have with our own individual fellowship programs, to develop transferable skills and competencies common to all fields, etc., etc. So PhD posts here. So that's the postdoctoral programs. And just a little bit of history for those of you who are not who don't know it. The doctoral programs were started at the beginning of Horizon 2020, but COFUND started out with just the postdoctoral programs in FP7, and we've been doing this for 14 years now in postdoctoral programs, very successfully. And in fact, as Christina showed you in her data, very successfully, in particular for Spain, which has been instrumental in managing to attract a lot of the funding from COFUND. So just two small points. Who can apply? Single legal entity. Well, that follows from the fact that it's a mono-beneficiary action established in the EU member state or Horizon Europe associated country. I expect everybody is listening to this from inside Spain at the moment, but just in case, Christina, you've had any people joining this webinar from outside of Spain, for countries which are hoping to become associated but which have not yet signed, we will still accept applications and in fact even evaluate these applications. We will just decide at the point when the grant is potentially due to be signed, whether or not the country has been associated or not. But for Spanish institutions, of course, this is not an issue because of your membership of the union. And we put in a small condition here: all beneficiaries must recruit at least 3 researchers. It's actually very unusual for a beneficiary to recruit anything like that small number of researchers. We really put this condition in for a technical reason, for 2 technical reasons actually. One is we don't want COFUND being somehow subverted into a sort of staff exchange program. We try to leave the rules for COFUND as open as possible, so it is possible for somebody who is a bit Machiavellian to try to do something unusual with it that doesn't really fit. So we don't want it to be subverted into a staff exchange program, and also it's also to try to make it clear here that these are not for individual PhD projects or postdoctoral projects. We see every year a few ineligible proposals submitted to COFUND, and it's usually an individual researcher who has misunderstood it and has tried to obtain co-funding for their research program that they may do somewhere or other. And we put this condition in to try to flag up to people like that no, it's not for one person, it's for more than one person. And it doesn't always work, but it's there. And the beneficiaries are required to host at the premises and supervise the researchers and use implementing partners linked to them to do so. So the fellows, both the doctoral fellows and the postdoctoral fellows, can be at the beneficiary, they can be at a partner, they can spend some time in different partners and at the beneficiary, moving around depending on what the research offer is that you would like to propose to us. Okay. It's open to both academic and non-academic sectors. I always find trouble speaking about this slide because actually it's almost shows the universal set, because it says here's the academic sector, and if you're in the academic sector you can apply, and the non-academic sector is everything else not in the academic sector, and you can apply also. In the academic sector, I think is clear. although I'll say a little bit about international organizations in a second. The non-academic sector can, of course, have a very, very wide range of institutions. It can be research funding bodies, for example. It can be museums. It can be anything which isn't academic. But just please remember that, especially in the case of the doctoral program, the people that are recruited, even if they're physically working in an institution which is non-academic, they need to be enrolled in a PhD program in an academic provider there. Just going back to, well, maybe not back to the academic sector, just let me say something about international organizations very briefly. International European research organizations, everything is fine. Same conditions as the rest of the Marie Skłodowska-Curie actions, they can apply. The only people that actually have a potential difficulty in applying for this are international organizations which are physically based in one country but legally based in another. Now, the number of cases where that happens is almost vanishingly small, but it's not zero. So if you are in an international organization, and I'm not going to explain it in great detail here because it will send everybody else to sleep, but if you are in an international organization, just get in touch with Christina or get in touch with us just to check that you are eligible for funding for this program. But having said that, that's really the only research providing organization which is possibly excluded from taking part here.
Alan, if I may,
yeah.
I'm just, because you were telling me that if there was any questions, there's one question actually concerning the formality of who presents the proposal. So I'm just gonna say it out loud to you.
Yeah.
And the question is, only a single legal institution can apply, but more than one beneficiary. Does this mean that all participants must be considered as beneficiaries, but only one coordinator?
No,
I know you haven't reached that part yet, but as you were talking about the legal beneficiary, well, then I just thought.
So thank you, Christina. So no, one beneficiary, but more than one partner. So the partners are not beneficiaries, and the way this actually works is what we call here a cascading grant. So if it was I don't know, Complutense or something, if they were the beneficiary, but they wanted to send somebody to Carlos III, then basically we give all the money to Complutense, but they can pass on the funding to Carlos III to deal with the researcher there. So one single beneficiary, all of the funding goes to the beneficiary, but the beneficiary can then disperse the funding amongst the partners involved in giving the research training. Is that clear enough, Christina, do you think? Or?
Clear. I think that's quite clear to me. And we got another question actually, because I'm just taking the ones that are related to your explanation right now concerning actually these association agreements that you were talking about.
Yeah.
What if a partner organization, that will be actually Horizon 2020 terminology. So I will say, what if an associated partner from UK is participating in the program recruiting fellows, although that will be an implemented partner, I guess. And at the moment of signing the grant agreement, UK has not signed the agreement with the EC. Will the proposal still be eligible for funding? How will it work?
Yeah, so I mean, there's a simple answer and a deeper answer as always. The simple answer is that your partners who are providing the research training can be in any country in the world. They do not have to be Horizon Europe or associated countries. It's only the beneficiary that has to be Horizon Europe or associated countries. Therefore, in this sense, the UK is currently just like Australia. You could use Australia as one of your partners, University of Melbourne, for example, And you can also use any university or research provider in the UK as one of your partners, whether or not they sign the association agreement eventually. So that initial part is not an issue. There is a slightly more complicated thing, which, if you don't mind, I won't get into, Christina, because there is a solution to it, which is that if the country is outside of Europe, so to speak, member states and associated countries, the way we deal with the transfer of funding, etc., is slightly different. But there is a solution to this. So I would suggest, for the purposes of this talk, we just focus on the fact that we can use partners anywhere in the world, whether or not they're associated to the programme. The technical details of how that will be done during the course of the grant may be slightly different, but during the proposal, it would be exactly the same. Yeah? Is that...
Yes, perfect. Yeah.
Good. Okay. Okay. So don't worry about the UK. God knows I worry about it enough. So if you want to use the UK, then please do. I was talking a little bit about implicitly about the different way a co-fund might be structured. And I'm just going to show you the two most common ways that co-fund is structured, but these are certainly not the two most, the only two ways to structure it. You can think of other interesting ways of doing things. So this so-called hierarchical structure, where the beneficiary is a research funding organization, but does not do any research training itself. But then transfers the funding to laboratories and universities and research organizations from it, and then manages the program this way. So that's one simple way to do it. The funding organization does it, but doesn't actually provide any research training itself. It relies on other partners to do it. And again, just a bit of history, when this was set up, again, as I was saying, 14 years ago now, we kind of assumed this was going to be the canonical model, the standard way it was going to be done, but it turned out that it's not. It's an important way, but it's not the only way that it's going to be done. And the other big group of projects which are structured in this sort of horizontal way, where one single research providing organization, the university, laboratory, research institute, applies for the funding, but then uses other institutions to provide some of the training, but provides also training and research facilities itself. And I think I say this every year, and I should probably change the slide at the end of the talk, because I never do, and then I come up with the same slide again. Don't assume from either of these two slides that the input from each of the institutions has to be equal, even though the boxes I've drawn it with or drawn it using are all exactly the same size. It could be that University 1 here does the bulk of the work, but it uses University 2 and Laboratory 1, etc., to either take some of the researchers completely, or to provide other opportunities to the researchers who may actually be based in University 1, but are going to the other places to use their research facilities or to learn from their research staff. And so again, for example, University 1 can be a Spanish university. University 2 could really be a secondment to the United States, for example, or it could be another Spanish university on the other side of the road. It just depends on what is best for the program which you are going to put together. I don't have another slide for this, but there's also a very small number of cases, but almost close to zero now, where we used to have one institution doing everything. And we really are, it's possible within the rules of COFUND, excuse me, it's possible within the rules of COFUND, but we are really seeing less and less and less of that these days. And if you are thinking of putting in a proposal as a single institution, providing all of the training with no partners, not only does it have to be a strong proposal, you also have to have strong reasons for not using other partners. So not just justify what you're doing, but also justify why you're not doing something as well. Yeah. Okay, so I said a few slides ago, I said that you can put in as many proposals to single call as possible, but there is a limit on the funding you can get from a single call, and the limit in the funding is 10 million euros. So if you can put in proposals worth more than 10 million euros, if more than 10 million euros worth are positively evaluated, then we ask you which ones you want funded. If less than 10 million euros are positively evaluated, then that's absolutely fine. We just go forward with that. I actually do not believe we've had a case. We've had cases of institutions putting in more than 10 million, and I think we've had it from Spain. But in fact, I don't think we've ever had a case of several proposals adding up to more than 10 million from a single institution being potentially awarded funding. So that's still the same from previous calls. I'm often asked at this point what the typical size of a COFUND program is. And actually, interestingly, Christina has chosen two very different programs to talk to you later on, where one is very big and one is very small. So I can tell you the average size of a COFUND program. It's less than 4 million for fellowship and less than 2.5 for doctoral, and that maybe even have gone down a little bit in the last call. We used to see actually quite a few 10 million euro proposals each time, but we are not seeing these anymore. I think the highest value proposal we saw the last time round was about 6 million. But I mean, I introduced this by saying small and large programs. Even though I can tell you what the average is, the standard deviation is huge. And we have funded programs which we contribute 10 million. We have funded programs to which we only contribute 100,000. So that's a factor of 100 between the smallest and the largest program. So really the answer to what the typical size is well, the answers is one, we do not tell evaluators there's a typical size, and we make it very clear to them that they should not give any preference to a particular size of proposal. It should be evaluated on its own terms, and therefore they really look at it in essentially cost-benefit terms. Is this 3 million euros we are going to spend well spent on the number and the quality of researchers that are going to be employed? So put in the size of the program which is appropriate for your institution. Don't overestimate, and also don't underestimate. Evaluators notice this as well. If you're trying to put it in cheaply, they're not going to give you the program. They're not going to give you funding simply because you've shaved costs here and there, potentially to the disbenefit of the researchers. Put in a fully costed program and just ask for a reasonable amount of money for the outcomes that you are going to persuade us you will achieve. So that's the maximum amount. The duration up to 60 months, and in fact we say to the evaluators, do not give any preference to programs which are shorter than 60 months. And in fact, some of you also may have had this experience in the past, but if somebody asks for 48 months and is successful, during the grant agreement preparation, we often strongly encourage them just to change it to 60 months in order to put some extra time into the program to deal with any problems that may occur along the way with extension of contracts, paternal, maternal leave, this sort of thing, sick leave, where contracts have to be suspended and restarted. So I think what I'm saying to you just now is apply for 60 months unless you've got a very good reason not to do that. And if you do that, we'll try to encourage you to change anyway. Or we can't insist, but we would encourage. And again, to try to get away from the idea that this could be subverted into a staff exchange program, any fellowship has to be a minimum of 3 months. Typically, our typical figures, our average figures rather, for a postdoctoral fellowship are about 24 months, and for a doctoral fellowship, somewhere between 36 and 42 months. But when we see proposals coming from liberal arts organisations, for example, we often see fellowships proposed for 12 months. So again, go whatever's appropriate for what you're trying to put forward. And recruitment, we say you use all appropriate channels for the program you're running, but you must also use your access in addition to every other channel that you're using. So this has changed a little bit from Horizon 2020, and it's changed right across the Marie Skłodowska-Curie programs. The eligible researchers that you will recruit in the COFUND program, doctoral programs, researchers without a doctoral degree at the deadline of the co-funded programs call. That's it. We have dropped the more than 4 years research equivalent research experience condition there. And the same, the complementary rule for postdoctoral programs. If you have a doctoral degree at the deadline of the co-funded programs call, then you're eligible to apply for the postdoctoral program. The 4 years full-time equivalent thing, at least in my mind, and I think in many of the minds of people, it actually served a very useful purpose. But with the numbers of applications we were beginning to see for the individual fellowship program, it just became very difficult to manage this condition rather than just have this binary doctoral, do you have a PhD, do you not have a PhD condition. So that's what we've gone for in Horizon Europe. We don't care what nationality the fellow is at all. And the mobility rule is the same as the Marie Skłodowska-Curie mobility rule. You can't be in the country of the recruiting beneficiary or implementing partner for more than 12 months in the 36 months immediately before the deadline of the co-funded programs call. So it's 12 months in the last 36 months. And again, with the same condition about international organisations that you have in the mobility rule. So it's not quite as simple as that. If you're an international European research organisation, that's essentially the rule there. Yeah. Now, just before I go away from this slide, this is an important part of the work that you will do. Because you will be recruiting the researchers, but you will then have to convince us that they are eligible for funding when you actually submit your reports to us. So we will not look at the mobility rule for any researcher you recruit, but if we detect at the time after when you're putting in your reports to get funded that the mobility rule has not been respected, then at that point we will say, no, we can't provide funding for that researcher because the mobility rule was not respected. So again, this puts a lot of the emphasis, a lot of the responsibility back on you to get it right, because it might then be a couple of years down the line when we're saying to you, no, you got it wrong and you're not getting the money. But usually that's only in a very small number of situations. So main differences. As I've just said, full-time equivalent research experience no longer applies. I'll get onto the exact funding in a minute, but we have changed the way the funding works from Horizon 2020, and we now give the EU contribution is now equivalent to the minimum remuneration required. So we say to you, there is a minimum salary you must pay these fellows in order for them to be called Marie Curie fellows. And that's exactly the amount of money we give you. But what's important here is it says here it can be used more flexibly. So we're not giving you the remuneration, we're giving you exactly the same amount of money, which you can then spend on the remuneration, or you can spend on some other part of the programme, as long as you're getting money to cover the fellow's salary from some other source. So we have absolutely no restriction about where that's spent, as long as it's spent on the programme, but it's exactly equal to the amount you will have to give the fellow as a minimum. It's probably true to say, and I may say this later on, that if you're going to put together a good programme and you're going to convince the evaluators that in a relatively high, well, in a country like Spain, for example, the minimum remuneration may not be considered to be a particularly attractive salary, and you might want to be offering more than that. But that's up to you to how to structure your programme. We now have easier possibilities for long-term leave or special needs associated with the COFUND grant, and the secondments have been changed. They're a little bit less flexible than they used to be, but they're still pretty good. Up to 1/3 of the fellowship duration, the fellow can be seconded elsewhere. We're also introducing the Seal of Excellence, and I don't quite know what you're going to do with that, but there we are. This is not for the fellows, this is for the beneficiaries. So we're introducing the Seal of Excellence for high scoring proposals that don't get funded. Right, award criteria. Just have we got Christina?
We did, yeah, we're fine. We're on time, actually.
Okay,
I don't know if you like me to, because there are a few questions, maybe before
why
going
don't we do
further.
Them now? Yes, yeah, absolutely.
We can do that. So I'm just going to read them to you. Some of them are quite obvious, but still. Is the 10 million euros maximum the total value of the program or the EU contribution?
It's the EU contribution, and that would typically mean the program would be probably. I may say a little thing about percentages, even though we don't actually have that concept here, but that would mean the actual program would be significantly more than that for the total value. Very probably significantly more than that. That's our award to you.
Okay. And then another one that was raised at the beginning when you were mentioning the bottom-up approach and the possibility to include a smart specialization, national smart specialization strategy or other specific thematics. So the question is it better to have bottom-up approach proposal, or is it okay to have them with this smart specialization strategy? What does the EC prefer? I mean, I guess
we have no preference at all, none at all. As I tried to say when I was talking about that part, our own. So we will accept proposals. That sounds as if I'm putting it in a very weak way. We will welcome proposals which are just based on the smart specialization strategy. Make it clear in your proposal that you're doing that. And then the evaluators will think no more about the breadth of the proposal. They will just be looking at the content of what you're doing. But if again, I think I said this, but if I didn't, forgive me. Let me say it again. It's not so much the case that we expect you to have a completely bottom-up program, because we know that that is not really possible in most situations with smaller research organizations. It may be possible for Spanish national research funding organizations, but you know, if you're Valley-Bron hospital, you're not going to be doing research in particular areas. So what we need you to do is to work to your boundaries. to make the biggest offer, the widest offer you can to the fellows within the constraints of your organization, or maybe even within the constraints of your geography, or just to make this absolutely clear, because this happens sometimes, within any constraints that come with your co-funding. So to give you a particular example of that, we have funded a handful of proposals in the past which have only been focusing on women researchers. And obviously that is restricting the population of potential fellows by half, but the funding, their co-funding from the organization came from a funding source which was only for women researchers. So we accept that, and then we don't, from that point on, there is no criticism. We just look at the program and see if it will work. Similarly, I think we've had cases, maybe not in Spain, but I think we've had a case in Portugal, but it doesn't really matter where it was, where the source of the co-funding was for reintegration of the diaspora. So I don't know if there is, but if there were a fund to try to encourage Spanish researchers to come back to Spain, you could apply for co-fund for that and say it's only for Spanish researchers, and the reason is that our co-funding is just for Spanish researchers, and again we would accept that and think no further about that as a restriction and just look at the quality of the program. So yeah, the basic point, Christina, is we know that every program will be restricted in one way or another. You're not an organization the size of the European Commission. You can't run a program like we are running where there's no restrictions. So we know you'll have to put in restrictions, but don't ignore them, justify them in the proposals. Recognize them, justify them to the evaluators.
I think that's the word to use, the justification. It really has to be very clear. There has to be a reason why behind it. If not, obviously, it won't be very well evaluated, I guess, because it won't be justified. So let me see if there are a couple of there are more questions, but let's maybe advance a little bit more, and then we'll take the next one.
Okay. So award criteria. I'm not going to spend a lot of time on this, but let me just go through it a little bit for you. I think we're past the stage of what I'm about to say, but let me say it anyway. The programs, even the co-fund program, are very competitive, and it used to be the case in the past, at least with national funding, where the scientific component, for example, of the research proposal was important, and all the other parts were kind of ignored almost in the evaluation. That's certainly not the case for co-fund, and it's not the case for any of the Marie Skłodowska-Curie actions. You have to score highly in each of the award criteria, and therefore you have to take them seriously, each of them seriously. And to that extent, those percentages in the bottom are really pointless. I mean, it doesn't really matter to you that you know them or you don't know them, but we do weight the scores, 50% for excellence, etc. But this doesn't mean you should be spending 50% of your time in excellence and 20% on quality. You have to get high marks in both of them. So you can see from the criteria, they're very, very similar with a bit of rephrasing to what some of you have dealt with in Horizon 2020. In the excellence column, this is all about what you're offering the researchers and how your appointment process is going to run. Now, that's two very important strands there. I've said a lot, well, I've said something rather about the options you're offering the researchers, but let me just go back and re-emphasize this. Maybe somewhat arrogantly, but nonetheless, this is what we think. You should be treating these researchers very, very well. They should have good salaries. They should have good conditions for doing the research, including money for travel, if that ever becomes possible again, or money for attending conferences, or whatever is needed. They should only be having to think about their research. not about where the money to attend the conference is going to come from, or indeed where the money to buy a loaf of bread is going to come from. They really should have a very comfortable existence outside of their research and be supported in every way possible. And again, I say this again, that's possibly one of the most important things that will go into your application. But having said that, let me then just look at that very first criterion there, quality and novelty of the selection recruitment process. This is what causes us here in Brussels the biggest problem in running COFUND programs is a poor selection recruitment process. And let me say up front to all of you, I mean, especially for those of you who have not really involved in something of this size before, selection and recruitment, to do it well, is time consuming and it's expensive. And we insist that you consume the time and spend the expenses, because you must be able to recruit researchers well. We want to see a transparent recruitment procedure. We want to see it to be open to researchers from anywhere in the world, and to have a high degree of competitiveness. In particular for the postdoctoral fellowships, this is not like it used to be, and I'm not saying anything about Spain here, because it's like this still in part in some of the UK, my own country, where people essentially a researcher has money to employ a postdoc, and they employ the person they want to employ because they've read some papers, or they met them in the bar the night before, or their ex-PhD supervisor was their friend and gave them a good reference. This is not enough anymore. We need to see a proper, open, competitive, transparent selection and recruitment process for the postdoctoral and the doctoral researchers. And we say that the selection process for the postdoctoral researcher also must be internationally based. So you need to have researchers from outside of Spain sitting on you with no conflict of interest, sitting on your panels in order to run the selection and recruitment process. And I just go back again at the beginning to say what I said at the beginning. This is time consuming and it's expensive. My opinion, having been on both sides of the fence here, that this is time well spent and it's money well spent, because you get the best researchers. But it's difficult at the time when you're doing it. So please factor that into your plans for putting forward a proposal. For the impact, we want to see impact across the board, from the individual impact for the researchers involved to the strengthening of good practices, certainly in your institution, but hopefully also at Spanish or regional Spanish, but maybe also international level. We want to see those. We want to see these processes develop and become better than they already are. And actually, from where I'm sitting, that has been one of the biggest impacts in COFUND over the last 14 years. That we have raised the quality of the good practices within institutions across Europe. They have taken them up because they wanted to get a COFUND grant, and then they've spread across their own institution for other funding sources. So in the second criterion, under sub-criterion, under the impact criterion, we talk about the credibility of the measures to enhance the career perspectives of the researchers. We want the researchers to come out at the end of this to be much better than they were when they went in, even though they were very good when they went in at the beginning. So you want to show how that will develop their careers. And we want to see measures to maximize impacts in a dissemination and exploitation plan, communication plans. And lastly, the quality. to use the, try to not speak in cliches, but last but not least, the quality. You have to score highly in this also. And this is basically saying, can you run the program? And you have to convince the evaluators that you can run the program. It's fantastic to have a good idea, but you may not have the resources to actually implement it. And therefore you have to show that in this last part that you actually have the resources, both in terms of the quality of the plan you're putting forward and the capacity of your institution. We saw not so much anymore, but we did see in the early days of COFUND institutions really overreaching themselves. And they had the money to do this, but they were trying to employ many more researchers than they would normally do every year, under the mistaken assumption that if you just say we have research grants, researchers will walk in through the door. Even if researchers want jobs, that will not happen. And if 100 people walk in through the door of an institution already only employing 50 people, the human resources are not going to be able to deal with it. So think about the capacity of your host organization, the hosting organizations, and please do not overstretch yourself. Make it clear that you have the capacity to deal with what you're proposing to deal with. So budget structure and implementation. So this is okay. I said the most important thing I would say was at the beginning, which was treat the researchers well. This is probably the most important slide for you. Actually has the money on it here. There are now new cost categories, and it's the column just to, I don't know what to call it, the second column I suppose, 2,800 euros and 3,980 euros. Those are the baseline figures there. So if you have a postdoctoral researcher, you have to pay the researcher a minimum of 3,980 euros per month. But that includes the researcher's taxes and the institution's social costs. So the taxes that the institution pays to the authorities in order to have that employment. But that's the minimum that has to be paid a month. But then that is also exactly the same amount of money which we will give to you, which you will earn from us, however you want to put it, because you put in a good proposal. Now, just again to emphasize, that does not mean that in an accounting manner, that 3,980 that we transfer to you is then transferred to researcher salary and taxes. That 3,980 can be transferred to any part of the programme, because it may be that your co-funding says that you have money for researcher salaries from your own co-funding that can't be used in another part of the programme. It's just that the two figures are exactly the same. And for the doctoral programme, it's less, 2,800 euros. And again, there's a minimum remuneration for a doctoral researcher of 2,800 euros. The long-term leave allowance, this is slightly less important in this slide, and special needs allowance. I always find these columns a little bit confusing, but what the long-term leave allowance is essentially saying is that if your fellow goes on leave, and you as an institution are still responsible for the part of the cost of that fellow, say you're responsible for 50% of the cost of that fellow, rather than 100% while they're on leave, then we will make a contribution of 50% of the monthly amount towards the cost of that fellow. So we will end up paying the same proportion of the costs while the fellow's in long-term leave. And then special leaves allowance, if applicable. I'm not going to get into this in detail, and I'll leave Christina maybe to talk about that if necessary, but you can apply for a special needs allowance within the context of a COFUND grant. So new cost categories is the novelty there, per person month. That means there's no longer a cost calculated for management. Now, that does not mean we expect you to do management on the cheap. We still expect you, obviously, to have good management for these programs. And the bottom line is we're actually giving more money per fellow month in total in Horizon Europe than we were in Horizon 2020. We're just giving it out under a different cost category. We have reasons for doing that, but it's not important why to you at the moment why we're doing it that way. Somebody asked in one of the last round of questions we had about the total budget of the program, and even though this is a matter for you, we asked to see it in the proposal. So we want to see the total cost of your proposed program in the budget you will submit. I think it's probably appropriate at the moment just to say something about percentages here. There is no fixed percentage of funding from you and funding from us. There was, some of you may remember in FP7, that disappeared because it became unmanageable. Neither is there any recommended percentage. Again, there is an average. The average actually turns out to be similar to the FP7 number, which was 40%. So typically for every €4 we give you, you spend 6 of your own. Or to put that in another way, if you're running if we give a €10 million budget out, the program might be about 25 million in total. But that's not, again, we don't actually calculate these percentages, at least in for the evaluation, and say whether that's good or bad. All we look at is to see whether or not you're paying the fellows well and supporting them well in the research program. And you will get a higher percentage from the way of getting a higher percentage from us is by saying, I will only pay the minimum salary and there will be no research costs. But then you must think very carefully about what the evaluators are going to think about that. And the more you put into it, the lower the percentage is going to be, because we pay a fixed amount per fellow. And on average, at least in Horizon Europe, in some cases, in many of the high-income countries, in at least one of the high-income countries, in fact, the amount we were contributing only came to about 15% of the total cost of the program. They were putting in a lot themselves. In some other countries, actually, I'm thinking also of a high-income country, but I won't say which one, we were paying almost 70% of the program because they did propose a minimum remuneration and the evaluators accepted it. But typically, we're paying about 40%. But again, don't look at it from through that end of the telescope. Look at it through the end of the telescope of the conditions for the researchers. Okay, and then the money will follow from that. That's the important part of it. So novelties compared to H2020, just some kind of summary here, but we've gone over both of these. EU contribution covers minimum remuneration, but can be used flexibly, long-term leave allowance, special needs allowance, and they're requested when the need arises. So you don't have to include them in your proposal. You don't have to say we expect several long-term leaves because we expect several maternity leaves, for example, or you don't even have to say we aim to, it might be interesting if you did, but you don't have to say we aim to recruit 10% researchers with special needs and therefore we're asking for this. You only ask for the money there when you need it and deal with it through your project officer. Okay. So something I haven't emphasized, maybe not at all, but as I should emphasize very importantly, every researcher has to be recruited, including doctoral researchers, must be recruited under an employment contract or equivalent direct contract with full social security coverage. Now, typically that's how it was done for postdoctoral fellows nearly everywhere, but many countries treated doctoral researchers as students and gave them a grant or a stipend. Under COFUND, they must be given an employment contract. They must be treated the same way as any other well-qualified person in their position. There are some places where, due to national legislation, an employment contract can't be provided, And in this case, we accept fixed amount fund fellowships. We have very, very few cases where this happens. And in that case, we only have the amount that goes to the monthly cost that goes associated with each fellow there. So full employment contracts for everyone or equivalent is the bottom line here. And think about that very carefully if you have doctoral programs, because I know that's not always easy in some national contexts. Selection of researchers, we've talked about, also open, transparent, merit-based. It really should be something like we try to do. Whether or not we do it well, I will put to one side, but it should be something like we try to do with the individual fellowships. It really needs to be competitive, and it really needs to be open to everyone. And that is sometimes a change in behavior for some institutions. The training program should really offer a wide range of opportunities for all of the researchers that apply to it. And it's a full-time funding, but we do allow part-time working in both programs, doctoral, postdoctoral, for personal family reasons, but for professional reasons only for postdoctoral researchers. But that we dealt with your project officer should the need arise. Christina, I realise
we are just behind schedule now. We are, I mean, we're just on time actually. I know you have this last part.
I can do this part here, or I was just going to say I could skip the Horizon 2020 part. It was
you
just
can give, if you wish, you can give maybe a very quick overview. I think that's also helpful.
Okay, well, you will. Thanks, Christina. You will all have copies of these slides anyway, so maybe I should just, as Christina suggests, say 2 words rather than 20 words. But this is just to give you an idea of what happened in total over 2020 for fellowship program, and you can see Spain coming out clearly on top there, and for the doctoral program, France doing better than Spain, but Spain still doing very well over that was 2020. This was last year here. So these give you some, the number of submissions has grown, but not enormously over the course of Horizon 2020, like the individual fellowships. So the number of submissions is still relatively small. The success rate is high. I don't have a good excuse for 2017. We've never quite figured out what happened in 2017, why it dipped down. I mean, we can see in the numbers why it dipped down, but not in the behaviour of the proposers why it dipped down. But you can see the success rate is essentially going between 25 and 30% all over the course of Horizon 2020. And it's by design. I mean, this looks like a very high success rate compared with other Marie Curie actions, and it is. But the argument here is that you are spending a substantial amount of your own money here, probably more than you're spending of European Union money. And you're just not going to submit a bad proposal, because if you submit a bad proposal, which accidentally gets funded because the evaluators have a crazy day or something, then you're going to be in trouble. So the success rate is high, but we design it that way to be high simply because we expect to see very good proposals from everyone there. Some nationality data there, you can go through, I won't be talking about that. So call details very quickly. So this year the call is open, it closes on the 10th of February at the beginning of next year. As I think many of you are aware, there were some technical problems with getting the software running for the call, but it's now fully functional and we will not be extending the deadline. So the deadline is still the 10th of February 2022 and 89 million euros. And then for next year, following more or less the same rhythm with 1 day's change, the 11th of October to the 9th of February, with a higher budget next year. So that's the calls in this work program. We expect for the rest of the framework program a similar rhythm, but the budget will be increasing every year, or most years anyway, throughout the framework program. And That's me, Christina. So actually, I did
That's
better than I
perfect.
thought I was going to do. So thank you very much for bearing with me.
Thank you very much for this very comprehensive presentation. So let me see, I'm just going to try to I don't know if you can see my screen right now.
If you've taken control, yes, I can. Yeah, you've taken control back.
Okay, you can see my screen right now. I think you can see the Mentimeter. Is that correct?
Hang on. I can see. Yes, I can see. Got it. Yes, thank you. Yeah. So under the post. Yeah.
Okay, so just very quickly, but I think we can take these few questions here. So this one, there was a very similar question. I think it relates basically to these 8 years scientific restriction that is included in the postdoctoral fellowship. So will it be possible to consider senior researchers more than 10 years, more than 8 years instead of junior researchers? In that case, how would the training be set? So it's basically two different questions related to the fact that if there is or not any restriction, and how to somehow envisage a training for more senior researchers.
Okay, so technically, no, there is no restriction. So this research maturity, research age, or whatever we're calling it for individual fellowship, postdoctoral fellowships, does not apply in COFUND. So the researchers can be at any stage in their career. As to regard to the second part of the question, and actually let me answer a slightly different question, a complementary question. We do often see COFUND proposals themselves come to us and say we only want it for junior researchers, and that's perfectly acceptable as well, to come and say we will only employ people with fewer than 10 years research experience, etc., etc. But with older researchers, I mean, I have to be careful not to tell you how to write your proposal exactly, but there really essentially has to be some training benefit to the researcher and not just funding of their ongoing research career. So you really should, if you're really going to try to convince the evaluators that you want to look at senior researchers, there really has to be some benefit to the researcher that wouldn't just come through some normal grant, and that they would somehow, and I understand this is difficult, but they would somehow develop their career even further by obtaining this COFUND grant.
Perfect. I'm just skipping some of them because I want to leave them for the end, but I just have this one on screen. Regarding the evaluation system, is it positive to involve evaluation agencies in the evaluation projects of the project?
It's neutral, Christina. I mean, you can imagine it might be negative in this, if somebody proposed a very poor evaluation agency. Well, okay, I say it's neutral. The fact of it does not give an advantage to the program. But if the evaluators believe that outsourcing the evaluations to an evaluation agency will actually produce a better quality evaluation than the beneficiary could actually manage themselves, then it's positive. So it's not positive simply because it's been outsourced. It's the quality of the evaluation which is the important thing.
Okay, and I guess it also depends on the type of institution that is applying. I mean, obviously they might have internal very good evaluation system in place already or not. So again, there are a few items there to consider. And now that we're talking about evaluation, this question raised concerning evaluation selection in doctoral networks should be conducted by external experts. I think they meant COFUND, not DN, or can it be conducted by international experts from the beneficiary or the implemented partners?
It does depend actually whether they mean DN or COFUND, or rather the doctoral fellows or COFUND in general. Look, I mean, let's start from the very basic point of view here. Whether it's a doctoral fellowship or a postdoctoral fellowship, the more competitive, the more transparent, the more open, the more lacking in conflict of interest you can show your evaluation process to be, the better evaluation you're going to have from our experts. So that's certainly true. So having something which is run by experts from, including experts from other countries, no conflicts of interest, etc., whether or not it's doctoral or postdoctoral, is the gold standard, so to speak. Now, what we actually insist on for the postdoctoral fellowships is that there must be experts from other countries, and that means based in other countries. It doesn't mean the British guy that's working down the corridor from you in Barcelona. It must be an expert actually working and living in another country with no conflict of interest. There must be substantial involvement at all stages of the process there for the postdoctoral fellowships. For the doctoral networks, we are a little bit more relaxed about this. We don't say there has to be international involvement, but again, the argument would be the wider your involvement is, the better. And certainly something that looks like, without wanting to sound too pejorative, just a group of friends choosing the usual suspects is going to fail. That's just not going to work. So keep it as wide as possible.
Okay, and just the last two questions, because I'm gonna actually answer some of them related to implemented partners and associated partners and their costs. I will answer that in the chat.
Thank you, because you probably do better than I.
This one related to what counts in doctoral programs. What's the meaning of at the deadline of the co-funded programs call, the MSCA call, or the deadline of the internal call launched by the awarded institution?
In both doctoral and postdoctoral programs, the internal call launched by the awarded institution. It's the deadline of your call, not of our call. Yes.
Okay, and we're going to finish with this one because it's, I mean, it has a setup that it's a little bit different. So for postdoctoral programs, could a fellow do a 2 years training and research in another EU member states or associated country and do a 12-month return phase at the beneficiary's country in Spain?
Yes.
So, okay, and if we got it right, it will have to be implemented by implemented partners outside of Spain in this case, who will recruit
Yeah, but that's fine. So this sort of outgoing fellowship model, so is a way of describing it. That's perfectly valid. Yes.
Even if it's in Europe and not outside of Europe.
Yeah, yeah. It's outgoing of Spain, not outgoing of Europe. Yes. Yeah.
Okay, perfect. So I think we can maybe leave it here because we've already taken around 10 minutes from Maria and Nuria. So I would like to thank you very much, Alan, for again this great information. I always say that we are very grateful because we get the person who knows more about co-funds and who can really convey the proper message. So thank you very much for being with us. A pity, as you say, because it's true that we had envisaged kind of a tour. I was going to say a road trip, no, but we were going to organize a tour in Madrid, in Barcelona. It hasn't been possible. Hopefully, maybe next year, it will be possible to do something like this on site. So thank you. And now I'm going to leave the floor to Maria and Nuria. And to do so, I would like to see if Jesus is there. My colleague, yes. Jesus Rojo, you are there. Hello. Hola, buenas. Buenos días.
Hello,
we're going to turn to Spanish, if that's okay. Jesús, te dejo, este apartado es todo tuyo junto con María y Nuria. Gracias.
Okay. Thank you. Hello, Alan. Thank you for your presentation. I think it was very clear. And it's a pity everything now is digital. It's supposed that I was flying to Brussels today, but everything was cancelled from the Commission. Anyway, I'm so delighted to introduce bueno, vamos a pasar a español. Tengo el placer de presentaros en este slot dos buenas prácticas, dos experiencias positivas de dos instituciones que vamos a aprender, yo creo que muchísimo con estas experiencias de instituciones que han sido beneficiarias de este tipo de proyectos. Tengo por una parte a María Sarela, que es gestora de proyectos internacionales en el Instituto Maimónides de Investigación Biomédica de Córdoba, el IMIBIC, con su proyecto P2Med, y posteriormente tendremos a Nuria Mateo, también gestora de proyectos europeos del Campus de Excelencia Internacional del Valle del Ebro, el Campus Iberus, con su Iberus Talent de Iberus Experience, con dos proyectos. María, todo tuyo.
Bueno, muy buenos días a todos y a todas. Vamos a acelerar un poco, como llevamos un pequeño retraso.
Perfecto, se ve perfecto, María.
¿Estáis viendo mi pantalla?
Perfecto.
El problema es que no lo veo yo. A ver. Ahora sí.
Te vemos
Perfecto.
y te oímos, todo bien.
Perfecto. Bueno, pues muchas gracias por la invitación, y escuchando la presentación de Alan, me he dado cuenta otra vez más que nuestro programa es muy peculiar. Es un pequeño disclaimer porque no hay muchos programas como nosotros, y a lo mejor hay algunos consejos que no son directamente aplicables a todo el mundo que está pensando en presentar un proyecto, pero bueno, yo creo que algo se puede sacar interesante, y mi mensaje también es para aquellas personas o instituciones más pequeñitos que no dejen pasar la oportunidad, que también caben programas que son un poco diferentes o son pequeños y salen de lo habitual. Así que vamos allá, a ver si puedo pasar esto. No puedo, a ver. No se os ha cambiado la pantalla.
No, no se cambia. Normalmente si pones el cursor encima de la propia imagen y le das con la flechita a la derecha, suele funcionar. A ver si te funciona.
Ahora sí.
Ahí, perfecto.
Muy bien.
Pequeños
Entonces,
trucos.
como os he dicho, como el programa es un poco diferente, voy a dar alguna información sobre el instituto y las características propias del programa, un poquito dónde estamos ahora y el camino que hemos hecho para llegar donde estamos, y al final lo más interesante, que serán algunos consejos que podemos dar desde nuestra experiencia para la gente que está preparando la solicitud o está incluso empezando a gestionar un nuevo programa. Estamos en Córdoba. IMIBIC es un centro mixto donde trabajan investigadores de la Universidad de Córdoba y también médicos e investigadores clínicos del Hospital Universitario Reina Sofía. Tenemos una fundación privada que gestiona la investigación. Es una gran ventaja a la hora de gestionar proyectos. Ser una fundación privada te facilita bastante el trabajo en comparación con instituciones públicas, pero bueno, estamos en un entorno público con un hospital público. Dos cosas importantes del instituto. Tenemos la acreditación como Instituto de Investigación Sanitaria del Carlos III, que nos da cierto prestigio, nos exige cierto nivel de excelencia. Y por otro lado tenemos el sello de excelencia de recursos humanos, que creo que es bastante imprescindible y útil a la hora de solicitar Marie Curie. El instituto es joven, fundado en el 2008, y ahora ya con bastante crecimiento en los últimos años somos en total unas 900 personas. incluyendo investigadores, personal de gestión, técnicos y la parte administrativa. Bueno, y nuestro programa se llama IMIBIC Fellowship Program for Personalized and Precision Medicine, P2Med, un programa que se financió en la convocatoria de 2018. Hemos hecho una única convocatoria para contratar entre 6 y 9 investigadores. El número no estaba fijado porque la idea era presentar un proyecto lo más flexible posible. Ofrecimos contratos de entre 1 año y 3 años. Dimos la posibilidad de pedir estancias, pero no eran nada obligatorios. Las condiciones de trabajo pues fueron bastante normales según nuestras tablas salariales, llegando al máximo de postdoc. El perfil investigador que buscábamos era también bastante variado, tanto investigadores básicos como clínicos, y luego teniendo en cuenta el topic del programa, pues también perfil bioinformático, que para medicina personalizada es muy importante. Luego abrimos también todos los grupos del instituto que caen en la categoría de grupos consolidados o emergentes, los abrimos como posibles host groups. Entonces, como el programa era tan pequeño, la idea era hacerlo súper flexible para compensar un poquito quizá que éramos un instituto no tan conocido y geográficamente quizá un poquito aislado, no lo más atractivo posible que se puede encontrar en España. También en el tema de selección y evaluación, pues queríamos abrir todo lo posible. Hicimos una evaluación un poquito blind, entonces los nombres de los solicitantes no se podía ver, por ejemplo, los evaluadores no veían los nombres, no sabían si eran hombres o mujeres. Los supervisores, los futuros supervisores, los IPs de los grupos no participaban en ninguna fase de la evaluación ni en la selección. Son pequeños detalles que luego creemos que al final han convencido a los evaluadores y han visto que el programa tiene la suficiente calidad para ser financiado. Bueno, entonces, ¿dónde estamos y de dónde venimos? Nuestra propuesta se presentó 2 veces, la primera con solicitud con una puntuación bastante modesta, de unos 77 puntos, si no recuerdo mal, pero vimos que los comentarios eran algo que podíamos claramente y bastante fácilmente mejorar. También consideramos que en COFUND la evaluación es bastante justa, las propuestas son más comparables. Entonces, si tú realmente miras los comentarios de los evaluadores y haces las mejoras, el año que viene seguro que tu puntuación sube. Lo mismo que no pasa siempre en Marie Curie individual. Entonces, al final, la carta de congratulations nos llegó en febrero de 2019, después de la segunda solicitud. Firmamos el acuerdo de consorcio, el acuerdo de subvención rapidito, pero aquí hicimos, creo que una de las mejores decisiones, que fue posponer 6 meses el comienzo del programa, de lo planteado en la propuesta. Realmente este tiempo fue súper importante para preparar toda la documentación de la convocatoria, que no es poca. Empezamos a trabajar el siguiente día de llegarnos la noticia y fue realmente importante poder aprovechar desde febrero hasta agosto con toda la preparación. La convocatoria, entonces, al final lo abrimos durante 3 meses, consideramos que fue suficiente, y se cerró en enero 2020. Ya sabemos todos lo que pasó después. Nos llegó el virus y las cosas empezaron a ir un poco mal. Entonces, la evaluación tenía que durar 5 meses y al final duró casi un año, se paró todo. Reclutamiento también queríamos empezar ya muchísimo antes y de hecho empezamos en enero 2021 y aún estamos ahí. Hemos podido reclutar 5 de los 7 investigadores seleccionados y para mitigar un poco este retraso negociamos esta primavera una amendment para extender el proyecto durante 12 meses. Aquí tengo que decir que mi sensación es que el COFUND es un programa con bastante flexibilidad. Los project officers que trabajan en la comisión tienen muchísima experiencia, te ayudan mucho en estas situaciones un poquito tensas de retrasos y te ofrecen muchas veces posibles soluciones que a ti a lo mejor ni se te ocurra. Entonces, yo creo que con esta extensión vamos bastante bien ahora. Es verdad que como nos falta todavía reclutar, a lo mejor hace falta unos meses más. Pero bueno, esto es un poco por donde estamos. A ver cómo vamos de tiempo.
Vas bien, María, más o menos.
¿Vamos bien?
Con
Bien.
un pelín de retraso, pero bueno, bien.
Un
no te
pelín,
preocupes.
vale. Bueno, vamos a lo más interesante. Aquí coincido mucho con Alan. Partner organizations son súper importantes. Hay que buscar un equilibrio, diferentes entidades que sean nacionales, internacionales. No creo que haga falta que sean muchos, pero presentar una propuesta sin tener un partner organization yo creo que no vale mucho la pena. Nosotros solo tenemos 5, pero son 2 internacionales, 3 nacionales y luego la parte de industria, por ejemplo, lo cubrimos con una asociación que tiene miembros de la industria. No tenemos ningún partner organization que sea directamente de la industria o de empresa. O sea que tampoco hay que preocuparse mucho aquí, creo. Buscar un equilibrio que tenga la dimensión correcta para el proyecto. En nuestro caso también somos el único centro que contrata. Nuestros partners no contratan, solo ofrecen formación o estancias. Otra cosa muy importante, el sello de excelencia en recursos humanos para los investigadores. Yo creo que es imprescindible. Además, ayuda muchísimo a la hora de redactar la propuesta. Nosotros dimos un montón de ejemplos muy concretos de las mejoras que habíamos hecho a lo largo de los años en este contexto de formación, de condiciones de trabajo, proceso de selección, etcétera. Y cuando dices que tienes el sello y demuestras con hechos cómo estás gestionando esta parte, pues yo creo que te puede dar muchos puntos. Luego, obviamente, hay otro tipo de méritos institucionales, premios, acreditaciones, etcétera, que yo creo que también son importantes de mencionar. Bueno, luego el dimensión del programa. Nuestro programa, yo creo, si no me equivoco, es el más pequeño, por lo menos financiado en España, pero eso no quiere decir que no pueda tener impacto. para nosotros como institución tiene un impacto tremendo y lo importante es explicarlo bien a los evaluadores. Ellos no conocen las regiones, no conocen las estrategias que hay a nivel local, incluso nacional, y mucho menos institucionales. Entonces, si puedes demostrar ahí que tienes impacto a muchos niveles y que estás en línea con las estrategias que te aplican, yo creo que el programa no hace falta que sea tan grande para tener impacto. Luego, desde el minuto 1, es muy importante tener el compromiso institucional y también de las entidades que cofinancian el programa. Los procesos pueden ser largos, con un programa que se presenta varios años en la convocatoria, pues ya se le olvidan que han dicho que van a cofinanciar el programa. Entonces, la comunicación interna es súper importante. Que la gente esté al tanto todo el rato de dónde está la propuesta, de la parte de presupuesto y eso no puedo decirlo demasiado porque es muy importante. Y claro, como tiene que ver también con la parte de financiación, en nuestro caso, por ejemplo, los gastos de investigación en biomedicina son muy altos. A la hora de diseñar el presupuesto y pensar la parte de cofinanciación que se puede buscar, tener muy claro de dónde sacar el dinero para los gastos de investigación. Si van a ser los grupos individuales que apoyan al investigador o van a ser las instituciones. Ahí nuestra solución fue un poco intentar enfocar el programa para investigadores que tienen luego capacidad de buscar financiación adicional, pero también que los grupos se comprometieran a pagar una parte del gasto. Luego, la difusión de la convocatoria puede sorprender los precios, por ejemplo, para publicaciones en revistas tipo Nature, que tienen estas ofertas de career offers, y son realmente caras. Y luego, si queréis contar con alguna campaña externa, también suelen ser bastante caras. Y para programas pequeños, como suele haber solo una convocatoria, pues te lo juegas todo ahí. Si el programa es nuevo, además, no sabes si te van a llegar muchas solicitudes o no, pues hay que gastar un poquito de dinero ahí para asegurar que la convocatoria llega a muchísima gente. Por otro lado, también, como dijo Alan, la evaluación no es muy barata, así que pensar también bien ahí el presupuesto. Aquí el gasto puede ser el dinero que se paga directamente a los expertos, pero también si queréis usar algún tipo de plataforma de gestión de solicitudes, que de hecho yo recomiendo. Seguimos. Proceso de evaluación. Yo considero que es una de las partes más importantes de la propuesta. Hay que pensar cada detalle de cada paso de la evaluación. Los tiempos son muy importantes, reservar suficiente tiempo porque suele tardar más de lo que esperamos. Ya alguien preguntó sobre la agencia. Tiene ventajas y desventajas. Nosotros sí usamos una agencia externa que era DEVA, que trabaja a nivel de Andalucía. Pues la ventaja es que ellos ya tienen obviamente su base de datos de expertos, se rigen con ciertas normas internacionales. Yo creo que es bastante fácil de justificar Por otro lado, la desventaja puede ser que por un tiempo tú pierdes un poco el control sobre todo el proceso. Hay que explicar muy bien cuáles son los requisitos de la evaluación para que la agencia haga lo que tiene que hacer. Criterios de evaluación. Pensando en este punto, pensamos en primer lugar escoger directamente el criterio de Marie Curie, lo que se usa también para los proyectos individuales. Pero no sé si fue la mejor opción, a lo mejor una pequeña adaptación hubiera sido mejor opción. También pensar exactamente los puntos que se va a dar a cada criterio. Hay que pensar hasta el formato de las entrevistas, porque cuando tú das instrucciones a los evaluadores y cuando das instrucciones a los solicitantes sobre qué va a pasar en la entrevista, tienes que dar la instrucción bien para que luego puedas puntuar como tienes tú hecho el criterio. Hay que realmente hacer un ejercicio mental para pensar todos esos detalles. Si está bien diseñado, no hay problema. Si está mal diseñado, hay muchos problemas. Otra cosa, el tema de quejas. No le dimos mucha importancia al principio y luego vimos que es muy importante. Va a haber quejas. Y yo creo que en todas las fases de la evaluación es casi seguro que haya quejas. Entonces, eso es otro proceso que hay que tener muy claro, sobre todo los tiempos y quién hace qué. Lo ideal aquí también es que haya gente externa sin conflicto de interés que decida si una queja es justificada o no. Vamos a ver. Luego, tema de formación. Uno de los puntos clave, creo, de nuestra propuesta fue que estudiamos muchísimo las necesidades de formación internamente, pero también un poco más ampliamente qué está pasando en nuestro campo de la investigación, qué está pasando en medicina personalizada. Leímos bastante sobre qué tipo de formación hace falta para los futuros profesionales en nuestro campo y el plan de formación que presentamos venía con su literatura, con sus referencias a papers, investigaciones sobre este tema, y yo creo que eso es lo que nos dio bastante buena puntuación en esto. Luego, tema de riesgos. Aunque la comisión es muy flexible, luego siempre se busca una solución cuando surgen problemas. Yo creo que hay que pensar mucho qué puede ir mal, sobre todo en evaluación y reclutamiento, porque es crítico. Aquí, por ejemplo, tuvimos caso de una investigadora que al darle la beca, las buenas noticias, pues había conseguido otra beca y quería cambiar la duración de su proyecto. Pues mira, no se nos había ocurrido. Entonces, este tipo de cosas que tienes por lo menos algo pensado para casos de cambio de proyectos o, bueno, intentar pensar. Yo sé que es difícil porque pueden pasar cosas que no esperas, pero sobre todo pensar que puede ir mal en evaluación y reclutamiento y poner un par de riesgos sobre eso. Lista de reserva también es muy importante aquí, que yo creo que para el tema de riesgos puede servir. Vale. Luego, para la gestión, como os he dicho, empezamos a trabajar inmediatamente después de recibir las buenas noticias de la financiación, pero es también un momento donde realmente hay que ver cuál es la fecha idónea para comenzar el programa. La comisión te suele dar la oportunidad de fijar la fecha dentro de un periodo de tiempo. Entonces, lo que recomiendo es ver los calendarios de la entidad, si ha habido algún cambio que pueda afectar a estos procesos. Una vez está fijada la apertura de convocatoria, ya todo lo demás se fija también. Y como es un proceso largo, pues mirar bien que no solape ciertas fechas importantes con otras cosas de la organización. Luego, documentación para solicitantes, súper importante. Nosotros empezamos por mirar otros programas, pero bueno, tampoco puedes copiar y yo creo que siempre hay la oportunidad de ser más breve y ser más clara. Hemos intentado hacer una información corta y muy clara. Siempre se puede mejorar, pero bueno, también tenéis toda la documentación de nuestro programa en la web nuestra que podéis echar un vistazo, pero es muy importante. Si te equivocas ahí en las instrucciones, te puede generar muchas dudas o incluso malestar entre los investigadores. Igual de importante casi que la información a los solicitantes es también la información que se guarda en la organización. Gestionar toda la documentación, tener todo registrado, saber qué te van a pedir de la comisión a la hora de hacer los informes y planificarlo bien desde el minuto 1, porque cuando el proyecto se pone en marcha ya no te da mucho tiempo a pensar. Establecer un calendario mensual o cada 2 semanas para registro de todo tipo de datos que te hacen falta. Si no, es muy difícil ir atrás en el tiempo y buscar lo que te falta. Sobre todo, tema de difusión, como se tiene que involucrar todo el instituto, los investigadores, los IPs, y tienen que hacer gestiones de difusión, pues ¿cómo vas a asegurar tú saber qué es lo que han hecho ellos? Tienes que pensar cómo guardar todas las evidencias de todo lo que tú has hecho. También del proceso de evaluación y selección te piden bastante detalle, pues mirar al comienzo del proyecto muy bien qué detalle te van a pedir y luego hacer tu gestión de documentación e información a base de lo que te van a pedir. Sobre documentos para solicitantes también me gustaría resaltar el tema de plantilla, tanto para el currículum como para el proyecto. Nosotros diseñamos bastante tiempo las plantillas y fue importante tenerlo bien pensado. Nos facilitó mucho la evaluación y el eligibility check. Otra cosa, como ya os he dicho, una plataforma para gestión de las solicitudes es muy útil. No sé si ya he pasado tiempo. Creo que
tenemos que ir acabando, sí, María.
Sí,
si puedes, vale. Lo que nos queda.
El último punto. Cuando ya tengáis los investigadores seleccionados y viene gente extracomunitaria, pues no dejar que solo ellos se encarguen de pensar todo el papeleo que hace falta el visado, sino ser muy proactivo en eso. Mirar también desde la institución qué es lo que hace falta y ayudarles desde el minuto 1, porque a veces se pierden ellos con el tema de papeleo y las instituciones pueden acelerar mucho estos procesos si están ahí involucrados desde el minuto 1. Eso es todo por mi parte. Perdona si he pasado el tiempo.
Nada, no te preocupes, María, ha estado súper interesante. Creo que tenemos una consulta, pero luego esperaremos a que termine Nuria y vemos todas las preguntas que surjan de vuestras ponencias. Nuria, ¿estás por ahí?
Hola.
Hola. Perfecto, vemos tu
¿Me ve?
presentación. A ti no, pero a la presentación sí.
Vale, ya voy a encender la cámara también. Hola,
Ay,
buenos
perfecto.
días, Jesús. Bueno, muchas
Buenos días.
gracias a los dos, a ti y a Cristina, por invitarme hoy a presentar nuestros dos proyectos y también a dar a conocer a Campus Iberus y también el tipo de organización que somos, que es un poco diferente también.
Perfecto, pues nada, estamos deseosos de conocer vuestros COFUND.
Muy bien. Bueno, pues nada, sin más dilación os voy a presentar primero lo que es Campus Iberus como organización, porque somos un consorcio de 4 universidades. Entonces, bueno, yo creo que entramos dentro de lo que es el modelo de estructura que ha presentado Alan, el modelo 1, porque son 4 universidades públicas consorciadas en el campus Iberus, que es un campus de excelencia internacional del Valle del Ebro. Entonces, son las 4 universidades públicas de las 4 regiones colindantes del Valle Medio del Ebro. Entonces, bueno, realmente nuestro consorcio sigue el principio de agregación estratégica de los recursos de las 4 universidades. Recursos para investigar, aunque nosotros, el consorcio, no tenemos investigadores como tal. Es decir, nosotros hacemos uso de todos los recursos de investigación de las 4 universidades que suman una masa crítica considerable en recursos de I+D+I, porque contamos con los 8 campus de las 4 y reúnen pues 60.000 estudiantes, 3.500 de ellos son de doctorado, mucho personal de investigación también y programas educativos también, o sea, programas de grados, posgrados y programas de doctorado. Pero en realidad las 4 universidades pues son de un tamaño mediano y en algunos casos incluso pequeño. Pero bueno, esta fórmula de agregación pues nos permite también acudir a este tipo de programas y a muchas otras acciones. Bueno. Realmente hace un año que Campus Iberus cumple una década, entonces somos relativamente jóvenes. Nacimos como fruto de una convocatoria competitiva del Ministerio de Educación para la creación de campus de excelencia internacional. Y a raíz de entonces, bueno, pues nos hemos enfocado, además de consolidarnos como tal, pues a poder hacer una difusión más allá de las fronteras, hacia Francia sobre todo, con la ampliación del campus, intentando también hacer un campus transfronterizo con universidades al otro lado de los Pirineos, como Pau y Toulouse, y más ampliamente a toda Europa, pues iniciándonos en proyectos europeos, en redes europeas de colaboración, y en los últimos años se ha hecho más expansión hacia Latinoamérica, países latinoamericanos con los que compartimos la lengua y bueno, sobre todo porque pues, fundamos una pequeña fundación, una delegación en Colombia hace unos años y se hacen muchos proyectos, o bueno, varios proyectos de colaboración internacional con ellos. Y ya en los últimos años tenemos unos hitos muy importantes en investigación conseguidos que nos están posicionando realmente como campus de excelencia internacional, como dice nuestro nombre, que son la obtención de estos 2 programas Marie Curie COFUND, ¿no? De atracción de talento. También es verdad que hemos comenzado con la iniciación de programas de doctorado conjunto entre las 4 universidades y se han intensificado mucho nuestros grupos de colaboración entre investigadores, grupos de acción o clústeres que ponen también de relieve pues, nuestra naturaleza colaborativa entre las universidades. Como os comentaba, estos clústeres, o sea, de investigadores, son investigadores que se organizan de forma coordinada para colaborar en investigaciones de temáticas dentro de 5 áreas estratégicas de especialización del campus Iberus, que son agrofruta y nutrición, tecnologías para la salud, energía y sostenibilidad, desarrollo social y territorial y economía circular. La verdad es que se han intensificado mucho las acciones colaborativas y ya tenemos unos 35 clústeres de investigadores que en total aunan más de 600 investigadores de las universidades de Campus Iberus, pero además engloban a otras organizaciones involucradas en la I+D+I del tejido pues, empresarial o social, económico, o incluso también otras universidades internacionales. Y bueno, como comentaba, estos dos programas, Marius COFUND, el Iberus Talent primero y el Experience posterior, realmente han sido un granito para nosotros para pues, consolidar nuestra naturaleza de campus de excelencia internacional, porque son programas de atracción de talento investigador internacional y de excelencia. Entonces, nada, comentaros lo que son un poco las similitudes de los dos programas, aunque uno es predoctoral, que es el Iberus Talent, y otro es postdoctoral, más reciente. En los dos programas contemplamos la máxima duración posible de contratos a 3 años. Bueno, son proyectos de 5 años. Aunque en el caso del Iberus Talent hemos conseguido, igual que en el caso de María, pues hemos conseguido la extensión de 1 año por una amendment. Y bueno, esto ha sido un gran alivio porque ya os comentaré. Además de ser de 3 años de contratación, ofrecemos una bolsa para los costes del investigador en formación, en costes asociados a sus investigaciones y en actividades de network. Esto es para los dos programas y eso, 9.600 euros anuales. Pero es que además, complementariamente, Campus Iberus les ofrece un programa formativo bastante pensado, ¿no? en habilidades transversales. Y nos hemos enfocado mucho también estos dos programas en fomentar la participación de los investigadores en actividades de divulgación, pero divulgación a diferentes audiencias, no solo la comunidad científica. Y su involucración en eventos sociales. Y bueno, ya os explicaré por qué, pero vamos, sobre todo derivados del momento que vivimos de pandemia. Y algo común de los dos programas es la incorporación de los equipos de investigación que acogen a los investigadores de un mentor o un cosupervisor no académico. Bueno, y las diferencias entre los dos son, pues aparte de que el primer programa, el Iberus Talent, era un programa doctoral y el segundo, el Iberus Experience, es un programa postdoctoral, es que el programa doctoral era de solo 2 áreas temáticas, agrofood y nutrición y tecnologías para la salud, mientras que en el Experience ampliamos a 5 áreas temáticas, porque bueno, nuestro campus ya se había especializado en estas 5 áreas estratégicas y entonces hicimos esta ampliación y esto también nos fue mejor para las evaluaciones, pero lo comentaré. En diferencias también es que el Iberus Talent es un programa bastante grande, son 36 PhDs que contratamos y el Iberus Experience es un poco menor, es de 11 postdocs. En el Talent lo organizamos en 2 convocatorias de solicitud y contratación, mientras que en el Experience lo estamos intensificando, lo estamos concentrando en una única convocatoria, con el programa que ha explicado María. Y bueno, lo que he comentado ya, lo de el aumento de las 5 áreas de investigación, que esto pues, nos mejoró la interdisciplinaridad porque en muchos casos los grupos de investigación en estas áreas interconectaban varias de ellas. Y en el programa doctoral las líneas de investigación estaban bastante definidas. Sí que se les daba mucha opción de elección entre las diferentes líneas, que eran bastantes. Y en el postdoc sí que fuimos aún más bottom-up approach y a simplemente presentar los grupos de investigación y dejar muy abierta las líneas que pudieran ser propuestas, o sea, la propuesta de investigación pues, que fuera directamente ideada por el candidato postdoctoral. En cuanto a los comités de selección, también tuvimos cambios. En el caso del primer proyecto, del proyecto doctoral, Campus Iberus estuvo involucrado en la organización de los comités de selección, que eran sobre todo expertos de las 4 universidades y algunos también expertos internacionales que ahora os presentaré. Mientras que en el Iberus Experience hemos incorporado la evaluación de una agencia evaluadora externa en una parte de la evaluación y otra es a nivel de cada una de las universidades. En cuanto a la diseminación de la difusión de la convocatoria, las 2 convocatorias del talent las fue por nuestros propios medios y en el caso del Iberus Experience, como es solo una única convocatoria y además es un perfil postdoctoral más senior y más específico, aquí estamos haciendo uso de la ayuda de una agencia de comunicación. Y bueno, ambos programas están bastante delimitados por nuestra estructura de consorcio y por nuestras 4 universidades, que son las que realmente contratan a los investigadores. Y aquí me gustaría resaltar que son las universidades, claro, las que están cofinanciando y las que los contratan, pero es que además 3 de nuestras 4 universidades tienen el sello de excelencia en recursos humanos en investigación y esto ha sido muy bien valorado en la calidad, sobre todo de los dos programas. Es verdad que muchas instituciones españolas tienen este sello, pero aún así es reconocido en las evaluaciones, o sea, es importante obtenerlo. Esto es pues ya decir muchas cosas, pero el caso es que nosotros nos presentamos a la convocatoria del 2017 con el Talent, que es una de las más competitivas en las gráficas de Alan, porque tenía una tasa de éxito del 17% únicamente y sacamos muy buena puntuación, pero si vemos el cutoff, 93,4, resultó ser bastante competitiva. Nuestra percepción es que de Iberus Talent Experience hicimos muchas mejoras institucionales y mejoras también en el diseño del programa. Sin embargo, luego en cuanto a salto de puntuación no ha sido tal. Entendemos pues, que bueno, ya en fin, las evaluaciones son cada vez un poco más exigentes y más extensas. Pero la verdad es que cuando vimos la noticia de que había sido el récord de propuestas obtenidas por ser la última convocatoria de Horizonte 2020, no pensamos que nos concedieran este programa. Así que fue una gran noticia para nosotros y igualmente ha sido bastante bien puntuado. El caso es que afortunadamente también financiaron muchas más propuestas. Entonces, bueno, simplemente comentaros que, como ya sabéis, porque ya han presentado, pues la excelencia es lo que más cuenta a la hora de la evaluación de la propuesta. Y aquí en excelencia lo que nos resaltaban en los 2 programas era la claridad con la que habíamos presentado los criterios de evaluación y los comités de selección. En el caso del Experience también pusieron de relieve la imparcialidad de haber incluido una agencia evaluadora externa. Más cosas, también las 3 Cs, ¿no? La internacionalidad, intersectorialidad, interdisciplinaridad. Esto, por ejemplo, lo mejoramos en el Experience porque al aumentar las áreas de investigación que las que ampliamos el programa, pues lo hicimos más interdisciplinar. También valoran la cantidad de información que se le proporciona al candidato, que tiene que ser suficiente. Todo el proceso de evaluación y las condiciones del programa, de elegibilidad, de contratación, de formación, etcétera. En cuanto al impacto, aunque es menor, también es bastante ponderado y en estos a nosotros sobre todo, bueno, lo que viene a ser los 3 niveles del impacto, ¿no? O sea, no solo a nivel del fellow, o sea, del investigador, sino también a nivel de institución y a un nivel más amplio. A nosotros a nivel institucional hemos tenido muchísimos impactos positivos del primer programa y ahora os comentaré algunos ejemplos, pero es que a nivel regional también han sido bastante reconocidos los impactos porque las áreas en las que ofertamos el programa son áreas de investigación que están alineadas con la estrategia de especialización inteligente de las 4 regiones que forman Campus Iberus. Entonces, esto fue bastante reconocido en este alineamiento, ¿no? Y Y en cuanto a institucionalmente, pues la internacionalidad, porque al final, pues bueno, son muchos investigadores internacionales los que vienen a las instituciones. ¿Qué más cosas sobre el impacto? Creo que es importante no solo el impacto de poder ofrecer un contrato más o menos competitivo, sino alinearlo pues, con los principios de europeos, de poder dar un apoyo a investigadores con familia, a poder también asegurar un balance de género y estas cosas, ¿no? Que están un poco también recogidas dentro de los sellos de excelencia de recursos humanos. Pero en nuestro caso, por ejemplo, no las 4 universidades tienen el sello de excelencia, 3 de las 4 sí, y entonces la cuarta pues simplemente implementa las buenas prácticas de las demás. Esto también es aceptado. Y bueno, y por último, pues la calidad. La calidad aquí nos evaluaron positivamente, demostrar que teníamos experiencia en la gestión, ¿no? Por esto de la capacidad de la institución de llevar a cabo los programas. Contábamos con un programa anterior, el Talent, pero también pues tenemos experiencia en gestión de otros programas europeos. Y bueno, también hay algunos riesgos y algunas debilidades que ya os iré comentando, que van a ir saliendo, que no todo era maravilloso. Y vamos a adentrarnos en lo que es el primer programa, que es el Talent, que comprendía el reclutamiento de 36 investigadores predoctorales, porque solo hay 35. En fin, lo que son los comités de selección, que son muy importantes porque dentro del apartado de excelencia, en este caso nuestros comités de selección eran organizados por Campus Iberus en una parte. El comité técnico, dentro de la evaluación se dividía en 2 fases, una evaluación de calidad y otra una entrevista. Y la primera fase se participaba en un comité técnico que era un comité formado por Campus Iberus, investigadores de 3 universidades de Campus Iberus, el cosupervisor, que podía ser o de una universidad que contrataba al investigador o de cualquier otra universidad con la que tuviera colaboraciones el investigador principal. El investigador principal de la línea de investigación y un experto que tenía que ser del entorno no académico. Esto lo hicimos así porque en su momento, pues estratégicamente estaba muy alineado con lo que es Campus Iberus y en su naturaleza colaborativa entre las universidades y entre sus investigadores. De esta manera, pues investigadores conocían a otros porque trabajaban de forma coordinada en las mismas temáticas dentro de un área y entonces les invitaban a ser parte de estos comités de evaluación, o bien porque tenían sinergias en esas áreas de investigación, formaban parte de las evaluaciones y podrían luego surgir pues, colaboraciones entre ellos. Y esto, sin embargo, pues en el programa siguiente, en el postdoctoral, lo hemos cambiado un poquito porque ya tenemos los clústeres muy intensificados, las colaboraciones entre los grupos de investigación ya marchan muy bien y para nosotros esto no era tan importante. También una parte del comité de esta evaluación de la calidad era totalmente externa, por lo que comentaba Alan, que tienes que involucrar siempre investigadores internacionales. Entonces, 2 eran de organizaciones internacionales ajenas a Campus Iberus. Y en la segunda parte era una entrevista en la que ya formaban parte únicamente 3 personas del comité técnico. Bueno, en total, para que os hagáis una idea, hubo que movilizar 252 expertos. O sea, esta labor es muy importante en cuanto a recursos, pero también en cuanto a esfuerzos de poder llegar a números tan altos, ¿no? O sea, también una gran parte eran expertos internacionales por el hecho de que 2 de estos evaluadores tenían que serlo. Entonces, bueno, es verdad que nosotros afortunadamente contábamos con las 4 universidades e investigadores que venían de ellas, pero bueno, también tuvimos una gran parte del sector no académico y de otras universidades, más internacionales. En cuanto a los expertos, es muy importante el balance, contemplar un balance de género. En nuestro caso, pues esta paridad no fue siempre igual, o sea, se estuvo rondando entre el 33% y el 40%. Y lo que hicimos para el siguiente programa, para el Experience, es limitar esto desde el principio, tenía que ser un 40% mínimo de investigadoras, de evaluadoras expertas que participaran en los procesos de selección. En total recibimos muchísimas solicitudes, porque además las solicitudes, o sea, permitíamos a un participante hacer muchas solicitudes. Y la verdad es que fue muy curioso porque vinieron de países muy lejanos y muy recónditos. Pues la verdad es que nos podemos dar bastante satisfechos con que la difusión, aunque la hicimos nosotros, pues fue muy extensa. Y en total, pues 61 países diferentes y muchas solicitudes que gestionar. Pero bueno, de estas solicitudes hay que tener en cuenta pues, que luego no todas pasan los umbrales de evaluación. Y esto es algo pues, que no es fácil estimar cuántos van a realmente pasar los umbrales y cuáles van a ser todo candidatos excelentes de los que realmente están solicitando, ¿no? Entonces, como veis, pues se fue bajando bastante de lo que eran elegibles a luego los que pasan los primeros umbrales de la primera parte de evaluación, en los que pasan la entrevista y los que son realmente luego contratados. Y en esto vuelve a ser importante tener un seguimiento del balance de género, intentar que sea un balance de género de al menos, pues, nosotros establecíamos al menos un 40% en las distintas fases. Y finalmente acabamos con un balance de género exacto, que en este caso, en el caso de un programa predoctoral, puede ser que no sea difícil obtenerlo así, pero en el siguiente programa, en programas postdoctorales, pues resulta un poco más desafiante. Y en total fueron estudiantes de doctorado de los que contratamos de 22 nacionalidades diferentes. Esto es muy enriquecedor, ¿no? O sea, la verdad es que es un programa muy internacional, pero también ha puesto en desafío algunas de nuestras estructuras en las universidades y ha impactado, yo creo que realmente positivamente, en tener que modernizar algunas de las estructuras y de incluso pues crear welcome offices y hacerles para poder hacerles el acompañamiento necesario en todos los trámites que comentaba María, sobre todo de los extracomunitarios, que son bastantes, pues en los procesos del visado, de la equivalencia del título, de la matrícula de la escuela de doctorado y demás. Entonces, hay muchos trámites administrativos que son necesarios, es necesario apoyarles. Además de estructuras a nivel de las universidades, nosotros en Campus Liberus creamos una red online, una comunidad de investigadores internacionales, predoc y postdoc, para que pudieran entrar en contacto investigadores internacionales de las 4 universidades a través de esta comunidad. Esto pues, es una necesidad que vimos para que se conocieran, porque al final están dispersas entre 4 áreas geográficas, los que vienen de este programa, pero también se abrió a todos los investigadores predoc y postdoc internacionales de las 4 universidades. Y la experiencia está siendo positiva porque este año que ha sido, bueno, y el pasado que ha sido un año 2 años de pandemia, pues facilita en parte la integración de los estudiantes que vienen de fuera, porque bueno, está todo minimizado el contacto social y poder crear este tipo de redes, pues ha mejorado la integración de sobre todo, de los que son internacionales. Además de crear pues, grupos y demás, se han creado eventos online para que se conocieran y Y también se están empezando a reanudar actividades que ya son presenciales, en las que se conocen físicamente, como son nuestras jornadas doctorales de cada año y demás, pero poco a poco. Y ya de forma más individualizada lanzamos un programa de mentoría en la que el investigador, o sea, el predoc, postdoc internacional puede solicitar un mentor, que es un doctorado del último año, que está formado o tiene contacto directo con la escuela de doctorado para que pueda acompañarle y guiarle en los trámites del doctorado. También, pues, socialmente, en su integración o en lo que necesite el fellow internacional. Otro de los grandes impactos del Iberus Talent, que también está diseñado así en el Experience, es el crear un programa formativo para los investigadores en actividades, o sea, en habilidades, perdón, transversales, y que son directamente con formadores expertos internacionales también, o sea, son formaciones en inglés. Esto, pues, es fruto también de una necesidad que percibimos que existía en las universidades, y es que las universidades tienen mucha formación a través de las escuelas de doctorado, pero una vez los investigadores ya no son doctorandos, la formación es más limitada. Entonces, para el Experience, pues creamos un programa formativo similar, pero para los postdocs. Y también otro tema es la barrera lingüística. En mucha de la formación de las 4 universidades está impartida en español, y esto, pues, no es muy problemático para muchos de los investigadores internacionales que vienen, pues, por ejemplo, de Latinoamérica, o que realmente aprenden muy fácilmente el español, pero no es el caso de muchos de nuestros doctorandos internacionales del Iberus Talent. Entonces, estos impactos institucionales, la verdad es que están siendo muy positivos para Campus Iberus. Y ahora os comentaré brevemente el Iberus Experience, que es el siguiente programa, que es un programa postdoctoral que ha empezado este año, en el 1 de julio, y ya tiene abierta nuestra convocatoria de solicitudes para los candidatos postdoctorales. Estará abierta 3 meses hasta el 31 de enero. Así que, bueno, os animo a que podáis hacer difusión. Este programa tiene una diferencia en los comités de selección respecto al Iberus Talent, puesto que en las fases de evaluación, en la primera fase, involucramos una agencia evaluadora externa. Esto fue así porque ya en este programa exige una propuesta de investigación, además de lo que es el currículum del propio investigador. Además, nuestros grupos de investigación que están interesados en acoger a estos investigadores postdoctorales son muchos más que las becas que se ofrecen, realmente son 11. Entonces, una forma de evitar, bueno, que hubiera una competencia entre ellos, pero que sea totalmente imparcial esta selección, es por lo que decidimos externalizarla. Entonces, la primera fase de la evaluación es a través de esta agencia, junto a un 60%, y la segunda fase es una entrevista que ya se hace a nivel de cada una de las universidades. Es un comité técnico que está formado por el vicerrector de investigación de la universidad, un experto internacional ajeno a Campus Iberus, que es del área de investigación del candidato, una persona de la universidad que está designada para velar por el plan de desarrollo profesional del investigador, nosotros, una persona de Campus Iberus, que supervisa que se cumple con los criterios de evaluación y los objetivos del programa, y el supervisor, pero solo tiene voz pero no tiene voto, para evitar la parcialidad. De este proceso de selección se termina en una lista ranqueada por universidad, y esto, pues, lo diseñamos así porque cada una de nuestras universidades es capaz de cofinanciar un número determinado de contratos, o sea, no son todas igual. Entonces, fue una forma de nosotros idear que se pudiera hacer así, de forma que en una universidad, si van a contratar 2 postdocs, pues serían los 2 primeros de la lista, quedando luego en lista de espera todos los demás. Y lo mismo por cada una de las universidades, pero con distinto número. Entonces, bueno, o sea, simplemente que esto depende de cómo es la organización y vuestros partner organizations, pues se puede adecuar. No hay un proceso de selección único ni un tipo de comités únicos. Está muy definido a vuestra institución y al tipo de programa que sea. Y nada, explicaros un poco en qué estamos basando la estrategia de comunicación y difusión de la convocatoria, porque estamos poniendo bastantes recursos en esta campaña, porque es única convocatoria, y hemos hecho uso de una agencia de comunicación, sobre todo porque nos hemos enfocado mucho en el contenido multimedia, en creación de vídeos, en los que, como no son líneas de investigación limitadas, sino que son áreas, se presentan los equipos de investigación que están dispuestos a acoger a los investigadores postdoc. Ellos presentan sus supervisores, cosupervisores y áreas, proyectos, líneas de investigación que tienen activas y demás. Entonces, bueno, pues creamos vídeos cortos que sobre todo difundimos a nivel de redes sociales. Hemos creado una red social en Twitter puramente para contenidos de este programa, aunque también pues, luego la utilizaremos para otra difusión de campus y virus, pero con lo que es un enfoque internacional, o sea, la creación de una comunidad internacional de investigadores. Y con LinkedIn también, que está más enfocado a redes profesionales, pero también hacemos uso de los portales de empleo, pues el típico de Euraccess, Find a Postdoc, Red Iris, y también hemos hecho uso de Nature Careers, que no es barato, pero en nuestro caso, pues al ser una única convocatoria, pues queremos ver cómo impacta realmente y si llegamos a tener una gran difusión y un gran número de solicitudes gracias a estos portales. También hemos hecho distribución, bueno, y seguimos en ello porque aún seguimos difundiendo asociaciones de postdocs internacionales o redes profesionales de postdocs. Algunas de estas son de mujeres específicamente y algunas menos de refugiados. Esto es importante porque en nuestro programa definíamos así, que vamos a utilizar canales específicos para este tipo de perfiles de investigación, que quizá cuesta un poquito más a este nivel ya de postdoctoral. Y muy interesante, también estamos haciendo bastante difusión en redes y asociaciones de investigadores españoles que están en el extranjero y que pensamos que tengan intención de querer volver. Y bueno, y ya para acabar, a modo de resumen, algunas de las lecciones que nosotros hemos aprendido de los 2 programas. Y es que es muy recomendable planificar con mucha antelación antes de ir a una propuesta, o sea, antes de ir a una convocatoria. En nuestro caso, tuvimos que involucrar diferentes niveles organizativos de nuestras universidades, no solo únicamente las oficinas de proyectos europeos, sino también a nivel de los territorios de investigación y también a nivel de rectores, porque las universidades eran las que financiaban los contratos de los investigadores. Y bueno, para que os hagáis una idea, si nosotros presentamos el proyecto a finales de septiembre, empezamos con las primeras reuniones ya en febrero, porque bueno, son personas muy ocupadas y cuesta establecer las reuniones con ellos y además hay que pensar también antes de reunirse y tener una idea más o menos estructurada y que tenga sentido de lo que va a ser el programa y al que se comprometan tus partner organizations, ¿no? En este caso. Todo el trabajo que puedas adelantar, intenta hacerlo. En nuestro caso, esto fue sobre todo una decisión que hicimos en el Experience de ya seleccionar los grupos de investigación que iban a acoger a los postdoctorales. Esto no fue así en el Liberus Talent y tuvimos que lanzar expresiones de interés para grupos de investigación que querían optar a los fellows. En el Experience ya lo hicimos directamente antes de presentar la propuesta. Entonces, en la propuesta iban directamente los grupos de investigación, los 31 grupos que querían participar en el programa. Y esto, pues, la verdad es que agiliza luego mucho porque ya puedes recopilar la información que necesitas de ellos de forma estandarizada con tus plantillas y con suficiente información para luego progresar, hacer la página web, etcétera, etcétera. Luego, es muy importante pensar y reflexionar y dar muchas vueltas a lo que va a ser el sistema de evaluación. Esto tiene que ser no solo que sea basado en méritos y transparente, abierto y que sea imparcial, que cuesta plantearlo, sino que también sea muy claro para los evaluadores y también para los candidatos. En este caso nosotros hicimos mucho benchmark con otros proyectos y también con las Marie Curie individuales, como apuntaba María, que comentaba que igual no tienen que ser iguales y no lo son. En nuestro caso, por ejemplo, no evaluamos los grupos de investigación entre ellos, no queremos crear una competencia entre los propios grupos de investigación de nuestras universidades que acogen a los postdoc. Únicamente valoramos los méritos de los postdoc y de las propuestas de investigación que ellos proponen, ¿no? El caso es que, basándonos en nuestra experiencia en el Liberus Talent, eran comités internos de nuestras universidades, aparte de los externos internacionales, y no remunerar a los evaluadores fue un limitante a la hora de poder luego adecuar los resultados de sus evaluaciones a nuestro timeline. La verdad es que aquí ahora pues lo hemos hecho diferente y además hemos incluido la agencia evaluadora externa que nos va a facilitar mucho más que la evaluación pueda ser más corta y que también, bueno, el tema de la imparcialidad que he comentado antes, ¿no? Luego, es importante hacer un planning realista de estas fases del proyecto, pero también tener en cuenta evitar tiempos demasiado largos, porque ahorran con muchas quejas por parte de los grupos que acogen, pero también de los propios candidatos. Y también, segundo, la probabilidad de que un candidato se descuelgue, es menor si los procesos de evaluación son más bien cortos. Y en cuanto a riesgos y demás, hay que pensar en lo imaginable. ¿Quién iba a decir que vamos a tener una pandemia? Las listas de candidatos de espera, desde luego, han sido cruciales para nosotros. Algunos candidatos han renunciado porque España estaba en riesgo extremo, lo más rojo del mapa de toda Europa, pues tener listas de bastantes candidatos en espera nos ha podido salvar bastante. Y pues no estáis solos, o sea, tenéis, aparte de vuestras estructuras organizativas, pues los Partner Organization. Nosotros nos coordinamos mucho con las universidades y no solo con las universidades, sino que se pueden hacer uso de subcontrataciones puntuales, pues o de una agencia evaluadora o de una agencia de comunicación, etcétera. Y como para terminar, lo último, pues hacer uso de todos los recursos disponibles, ¿no? O sea, pues eventos como este, experiencias compartidas de otros proyectos, networks y redes, como la de beneficiarios, son de gran utilidad para compartir buenas prácticas, ideas y resolver también durante la gestión y la implementación del programa. Todo tipo de seminarios web, como los de la comisión directamente o los del portal nacional de Horizonte Europa, las guías del programa, del aplicante, o sea, del solicitante y demás. Y consultorías también son muy útiles. Nosotros hemos hecho uso de una consultoría en los dos programas. Y sobre todo pues, los puntos nacionales de contacto, que también hacen una muy buena labor en la revisión de las propuestas. Y creo que esto es todo. Simplemente agradeceros vuestra atención y también en nombre de Campus Iberus, que no somos tantos, somos aunque hemos crecido, simplemente pues bueno, pues somos un consorcio y cuando lo necesitamos pues podemos hacer uso también de las universidades, aunque cueste a veces coordinarse, el ser pequeños pues también nos da cierta agilidad a la hora de resolver muchas de las cosas que surgen dentro de estos programas.
Muchas gracias, Nuria, por tu presentación, súper interesante. Hemos visto cómo empezáis con un predoctoral y pasáis a un postdoctoral, y lo mismo para María. Tenemos algunas preguntas. Ahí nos ha compartido Cristina la primera pregunta: ¿cómo gestionar un programa de 60 meses con una sola convocatoria, donde los contratados son proyectos de 36 meses? Si alguna de vosotras queréis comentarlo, y si no, pues puedo dar yo mi opinión, pero bueno, creo que...
¿Quieres hablar tú, María? Que yo acabo de estar mucho tiempo hablando.
Bueno, esto es nuestro caso. De hecho, al final, aunque teníamos la flexibilidad de los proyectos de entre 1 año y 3, pues todos los fellows han solicitado un proyecto de 3 años y nuestro programa dura 60 meses, pero bueno, ¿cómo se gestiona? No entiendo muy bien la pregunta. Si se refiere a los tiempos, nosotros la idea era dejar 1 año de margen al final del programa después de que cierren los proyectos individuales. Pero bueno, ya con la pandemia se ha ido todo. Ha habido cambios y también la idea era que todos los fellows entren más o menos en la misma época, pues tampoco, cosas que pasan, pero afortunadamente, si el proyecto son 60 meses, la comisión, yo creo que siempre cuando se justifica bien, te concede por lo menos 12 meses más.
Efectivamente, de hecho, creo que para los solicitantes de esta próxima convocatoria tendrán que plantearse si quieren proyectos de 1 o de 2 convocatorias. Hombre, yo personalmente creo que me gusta más a lo mejor un proyecto de una sola convocatoria, porque te da un margen en esos 60 meses, porque pueden pasar de todo, y sobre todo porque contratas personas, situaciones personales, pandemias, que te van a hacer tener estas contingencias frente al proyecto. Pero bueno, hemos visto que hay proyectos de 1 convocatoria y de 2, incluso algunos yo creo que también de 3, pero creo que es interesante vuestro punto de vista de cómo lo habéis planteado. Cristina, ¿me pones si quieres la primera que había, la del Open Access, para responderle a la persona que primero preguntó, que incluso a lo mejor Alan puede también dar su punto de vista? There is someone, Alan, somebody is asking about how to deal with open science in a postdoc program with IPs, with co-IPs, how to deal with the open science at individual level or institutional level. I don't know how was your experience, Nuria and Maria, when the fellows are publishing articles in journals, in open science, the repository. I don't know who want to answer this question.
Puedo contestar yo a nivel de lo que hemos hecho en Campus Iberus, ya a un nivel más general, pues dejaré a Alan que conteste. Should I do it in English? Sorry. Okay, well, in Campus Iberus, we did, as part of our training program, we included a training course on open science to know how PhDs should deal with open science, and then for sure is the obligation of open access on the publications. And this is something that sometimes is researchers are a bit reluctant, depending on the journals they are used to publish, but we need to monitor that it is done this way. and but I don't have any experience on problems regarding co-supervisors and supervisors related to this open science issue.
Okay. I mean, the regulations, the recommendations about open science from the European Commission are the same for COFUND as they are for anything. So we are expecting the beneficiaries to manage this properly. I mean, I'm not exactly sure what the question is asking, to be honest, Jesus, except that this has to be done.
Yes, I think in Horizonte Europa, open science is crucial. So I think applicants in this new call should explain in detail how they are going to deal with data management plans, open science publication repositories. So I think it's a hot topic. As you know, in my institution, we are having this training online, and you can check in YouTube this training, how to deal with Horizonte Europe requirements on open science. Thank you, Alan, and thank you, Nuria. Gracias, Nuria. Tenemos otra pregunta que ya Nuria ha contestado antes, en el tema de si en un COFUND de postdoctorales deben escribir la solicitud como un proyecto más como las postdoctoral fellowship. Bueno, Nuria ha comentado que no se evalúan las instituciones para que no haya conflicto entre ellos. Muchos COFUND usan la plantilla de individual fellowship, de postdoctoral fellowship, otras no. 6 páginas, 10 páginas, pero yo creo que es lo habitual, tener un modelo que funciona como pueden ser las individual fellowship o las postdoctoral fellowship. Ahí ya creo que hay un poco de libertad. No sé, María, ¿cuál ha sido vuestro planteamiento como plantilla a los solicitantes?
Pues igual, en nuestra propuesta de proyecto tampoco se evaluaba el grupo, ya teníamos por hecho de que todos los grupos que pueden acoger los fellows tienen la suficiente calidad, entonces solo se evaluaba el currículum y el proyecto que presentaba el candidato. Y la plantilla, hicimos una pequeña simplificación de la plantilla de Marie Curie individual.
Perfecto, perfecto. Creo que, no sé, Nuria, vosotros cómo habéis hecho, pero es algo muy habitual.
Sí, pues también lo hemos tenido en cuenta. O sea, es verdad que hemos tenido en cuenta también otros proyectos como los nacionales, de Ramón y Cajal. O sea, hicimos como un benchmark de distintos programas de investigadores de excelencia para hacer esta plantilla, pero nos basamos un poco también en la individual, en la Marie Curie Individual Fellowship, sí.
Perfecto. Y Nuria, aquí hay una pregunta para ti directamente. El presupuesto para la contratación de la agencia de comunicación, si estaba contemplado en la propuesta.
Pues esto es un poco peleagudo, porque en principio sí que estaba contemplado hacerlo por la agencia evaluadora externa y demás. Y habíamos pedido presupuestos antes de presentar la propuesta, pero lo que es el presupuesto real no lo vamos a saber hasta que no tengamos cerrada la convocatoria y tengamos el número de expedientes a evaluar. Entonces es algo que más o menos se puede estimar, pero no es certero hasta el cierre de convocatoria. Y aquí pues nos podemos llevar sustos hacia los dos lados, ¿no? A que no tengamos casi solicitudes o que tengamos muchísimas y haya que pagarlas todas. Entonces es algo a estimar, pero que realmente, bueno, nosotros lo que hicimos fue solicitar, hacer una estimación de un número y también solicitar presupuestos a varias agencias, porque nosotros somos una entidad pública, entonces sí que necesitábamos pedir presupuestos a varios y lo hacíamos por expediente, o sea, un coste unitario para la comparación.
Cristina, me pones, a ver, que se me han pasado las preguntas. Había una...
He ido quitando algunas porque si no, no llegamos de tiempo. Soy mala por detrás, pero ya...
Vale, una pregunta para nosotros. Hay que añadir Implementing y Associated Partners al portal y rellenar sus formularios de la propuesta. Yo todavía no he podido entrar en el formulario. Creo que sí que hay que incluirlos, al menos los associated partners, juraría. Pero bueno, envíanos esta pregunta al correo, lo tenemos que comprobar porque bueno, el viernes pasado tuvimos la formación y no hemos podido tener oportunidad de meternos y comprobar todos los detalles de los formularios A y formularios B.
I was going to ask maybe Alan there because we haven't been able to check it, as Jesus mentioned. What we are sure is that both associated partner and implemented partners have to include a letter of commitment. That's for sure. That's correct, right, Alan? Oh, wait, just 1 second. We cannot hear you. Now we can hear you. Yes.
Okay. Even if it absolutely turns out that that's not the case, we strongly recommend that everybody does it. So we need just, yes, we want letters of commitment from all partners, basically. Yes.
Okay.
I mean, okay, and now I'm going to argue with myself because I'm going to qualify that a little bit. There are some small number of cases. There are cases where the partners are not known at the stage of the application. That's fine. So all partners known at the stage of the application. And there are other cases where the partners are so numerous, and I'm talking about hundreds here, not dozens. The partners are so numerous that it would be unreasonable to do that. But in that case, the principal partners should include letters of recommendation. We have institutions which fund co-funds where people can go to any research institution in the world. So asking for letters there would be unreasonable. But you know, dozens of letters, I'm afraid, yes.
Thank you. Hay otra bueno, un comentario sobre lo del Open Science. Efectivamente, todas las propuestas de COFUND tienen que estar alineadas con el Open Science de Horizonte Europa, tanto a publicaciones, datos, protocolos. Cuanto más abierto y más cumpláis Open Science de Horizonte Europa, mejor será evaluada vuestra propuesta. Que no quede ninguna duda de que vuestro COFUND no cumpla todos los requisitos de la ciencia abierta de Horizonte Europa. Yo creo que ahí se tiene que intentar que sea lo más abierto posible en vuestra propuesta. Creo que eso sería una buena práctica en la parte de evaluación, sobre todo porque los evaluadores van a tomar en consideración lo que se les dé en el briefing, y el Open Science es una sección transversal a todas las propuestas de Horizonte Europa, incluidas todas las de Programa Marco. Cristina, no te vemos. ¿Quieres hacer el cierre? Si quieres.
Sí.
Te
Yo
doy los
creo
honores.
que... Gracias, Jesús. Gracias, María. Gracias, Nuria. Maybe there were a couple of questions that have not been answered, but please do send them to msca@petit.es, and we will shortly get back to you on a bilateral basis. That sometimes is easier because we have to check ourselves the document before giving the right answer. So we are really behind schedule, but I think it was worth it. We got very comprehensive and explanatory presentations. So thank you, all of you, Maria, Nuria, Alan, for sticking there, Alan. And we hope we really solve some of the questions about this new call. And we really encourage participants to apply and hopefully get the grants. So thank you very much and have a good day.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you, everyone. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye.